The fluorescent lights of Martinez Security Solutions flickered overhead as Ethan Cole clocked out at 11:47 p.m., his third shift of the day finally behind him. His reflection in the glass door showed a man 10 years older than his 32 years. Exhausted eyes, shoulders permanently hunched from carrying weight that never got lighter. He'd started his morning at 5 a.m. driving for a rideshare company, spent his afternoon stocking shelves at a warehouse, and ended his night walking empty corridors as a security guard. 3 jobs. 1 father. 0 margin for error. The November air hit him like cold truth as he stepped onto the street. His ancient Honda sat in the far corner of the lot, passenger door held shut with duct tape, check engine light, a permanent constellation on his dashboard. 12 more hours until he had to do it all again. 12 hours to sleep, wake Jamie for school, make breakfast, pack lunch, pretend everything was fine, pretend the overdue notices stuffed in his kitchen drawer didn't exist, pretend his son didn't deserve so much better than a father running on fumes and false optimism. But tonight, something made him pause. Through the window of Murphy's bar across the street, he saw her. A woman in an expensive navy dress, platinum hair disheveled, leaning heavily against the bar while 2 men closed in from either side, like wolves circling wounded prey. Even from 50 feet away, Ethan could read the situation. Could see her trying to wave them off, her movements sluggish, her balance failing. Could see how they smiled at each other over her head, already dividing the spoils. Every rational part of his brain screamed to walk away. He had Jamie waiting at home with Mrs. Chen from 4B, had to be up in 5 hours, couldn't afford trouble, couldn't risk anything that might jeopardize the fragile ecosystem of survival he'd constructed. But then the woman stumbled, and one of the men caught her arm in a grip that was nothing like support, and something older than exhaustion moved through Ethan's chest, something that remembered who he used to be before the world broke him down into shifts and survival. He crossed the street. If you want to see how one exhausted father's refusal to look away tears down every wall he's built to survive, stay with me until the end, and let me know what city you're watching from in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. Hit that like button, and let's begin. The bar smelled like spilled beer and broken promises. Ethan pushed through the heavy door, the sudden warmth and noise hitting him like a physical wall. Classic rock played too loud from speakers that had given up clarity years ago. The Friday night crowd filled most of the booths, construction workers still in their vests, office workers with loosened ties, people drinking away the week's accumulated disappointments. The woman was still at the bar, now practically draped over it. Up close, Ethan could see the quality of her clothes, the kind of navy dress that cost more than his monthly rent, pearl earrings that caught the light, designer heels abandoned on the floor beneath her stool. Her platinum blonde hair had probably started the evening in some elegant arrangement, but now fell across her face in disheveled waves. She was maybe late 30s, and even in her current state, there was something striking about her. Sharp features softened by intoxication, an air of authority that alcohol couldn't completely dissolve. The 2 men flanking her were exactly what Ethan had suspected. Mid-40s, dressed in the kind of business casual that said, middle management, wedding rings catching the light as they moved closer. The one on the left, balding, red-faced, had his hand on the small of her back. The one on the right, younger, crueler smile, was signaling the bartender to pour another round. "Think she's had enough," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the noise with unexpected authority. 3 heads turned. The woman's eyes struggled to focus. The 2 men's expressions shifted from surprise to irritation to calculation in rapid succession. "We got this handled, friend," Redface said, his tone dripping with false friendliness. "Lady's just having a good time. We're making sure she gets home safe." "I'm sure you are," Ethan replied, not moving, "which is why you're ordering her more drinks instead of calling her a cab." Cruel smile straightened, sizing Ethan up. Ethan knew what he saw. Someone in a cheap security guard uniform, looking like he'd already fought and lost every battle that mattered. Not a threat, just an inconvenience. "Listen, hero," Cruel Smile said, taking a step forward. "Why don't you mind your own business before you—" "Before I what?" Ethan's voice didn't rise, but something in it made both men hesitate. It was the voice of someone who'd already lost everything that could be threatened, someone with nothing left to protect except the principle of the thing. Before you two keep doing what you were planning? Before she wakes up tomorrow not remembering how she got wherever you're taking her? The woman lifted her head, platinum hair falling back to reveal striking features struggling against the fog of alcohol. Her eyes, green, sharp even through the haze, fixed on Ethan with something like recognition, though they'd never met. I'm fine, she slurred, the words requiring visible effort. Just needed to forget for a while. See? Redface gestured broadly. She's fine. We're just helping a lady in distress, so why don't you step away from her, Ethan said quietly. Now. The bar had gone noticeably quieter. Conversations continued, but eyes were turning their direction. The bartender, a thick-necked man who'd clearly seen this movie before, put down the glass he was drying and started moving toward them. Cruel Smile's hand moved to his pocket, and for a terrible second, Ethan thought about weapons, about violence, about Jamie waking up to Mrs. Chen telling him his father wasn't coming home. But the hand emerged holding a phone. You know who I am? Cruel Smile's voice had taken on an ugly edge. I'm VP of Operations at Hale Industries. You just threatened me. I could have you arrested. You could walk away, Ethan interrupted. Which is what you're going to do. The bartender arrived, his bulk and crossed arms adding weight to Ethan's suggestion. Gentlemen, he said to the two men, his tone making the word ironic, I think it's time you found somewhere else to be. For a moment, violence hung in the air like a held breath. Then Redface muttered something vicious under his breath and turned away. Cruel Smile lingered a moment longer, memorizing Ethan's face with a look that promised consequences, before following his companion toward the door. You're dead, he said as he passed. Monday morning, you're done. I'll make sure of it. Then they were gone, and Ethan was left standing next to a woman who couldn't stand on her own and a bartender who looked equal parts impressed and exasperated. She's been here since 6, the bartender said. Started with wine, moved to vodka around 8. Those two showed up an hour ago. I was about to call it myself, but... He shrugged. Thanks. She have a phone? Someone we can call? The woman fumbled in the small clutch purse still somehow attached to her wrist, nearly dropping it twice before producing an iPhone with a cracked screen. Ethan took it gently. It was locked. Face ID useless with her unable to hold her head steady. What's your passcode? He asked softly. She squinted at him, and for just a second her eyes cleared, really looked at him, saw something that made her make a decision that would change everything. 77492, she whispered, then softer. Why are you helping me? Because no one should have to wake up wondering what happened to them, Ethan said simply. He unlocked the phone, navigating to her contacts. The list was surprisingly sparse for someone who carried herself with such obvious wealth. A handful of names, mostly professional titles. No mom or dad, no sister or best friend. Just personal assistant, Marcus, legal, Davidson, board, Harrison, and a few others equally impersonal. He tried Marcus first. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. Harrison's phone was turned off. Legal didn't answer. Do you have someone? Anyone we can call to come get you? She laughed, a broken sound that held more pain than humor. No one? Nobody gives a damn. Her head lolled forward. Empty. It's all empty. The bartender leaned in. Look, I close in 20 minutes. You taking her, or should I call the cops? Let them handle it. Ethan thought about police, about reports, about a woman this vulnerable in a holding cell, or worse. Thought about those 2 men and their promises of revenge. Thought about his son waiting at home, about his 5 a.m. shift, about every reason to walk away. I'll take her, he heard himself say. Getting her to the car proved more challenging than the confrontation. She could barely walk, her expensive heels useless on her feet. Ethan ended up carrying them in one hand while supporting her weight with his other arm around her waist. She leaned heavily against him, mumbling something incoherent about quarterly reports and disappointing everyone. What's your address? He asked as they reached his battered Honda. Where do you live? Doesn't matter. Nowhere matters. She was fading fast, consciousness slipping away like water through fingers. He tried her phone again, looking for anything that might indicate home. Maps showed a recent location, Hale Industries headquarters, but nothing marked as home. Her emails were locked behind additional passwords. Her Photos app showed mostly screenshots of documents and graphs, nothing personal. Hale Industries, where that man had said he worked. VP of Operations. Ethan looked at the woman now slumped against his car, at the quality of her clothes, the bearing she maintained, even in crisis. A terrible suspicion was forming, but he pushed it aside. Right now, she was just someone who needed help, and he was someone who couldn't walk away. But he couldn't take her to a hotel. She had no ID out, no way to check in, and he had maybe $30 to his name until next Friday. He couldn't leave her in the car. November nights in this city got cold enough to kill. He couldn't keep trying strangers from her phone. What if one of them was worse than the men he'd chased away? Which left exactly one option, and it was possibly the worst decision he'd made in a life full of questionable choices. "Okay," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "Just for tonight. Just until you sober up enough to tell me where you belong." He helped her into the passenger seat, where she immediately curled against the window and went silent. The duct tape holding the door closed had never seemed more humiliating than now, with this woman in her $1,000 dress tucked into his falling-apart life. The drive to his apartment took 15 minutes through empty streets. She didn't wake when he pulled into the cracked parking lot of Riverside Apartments, didn't stir when he killed the engine. For a terrible moment, he thought she'd stopped breathing, but then he saw the slow rise and fall of her chest, heard her soft exhalation. Getting her up 3 flights of stairs while keeping her quiet enough not to wake his son required skills he hadn't known he possessed. She roused slightly on the second landing, mumbling something that sounded like merger or maybe murder, before her head lolled back against his shoulder. Mrs. Chen opened her door a crack as he reached his floor, her weathered face creasing with concern and curiosity. She was 70-something, had been watching Jamie 3 nights a week for 2 years, never asked for more than Ethan could afford, never judged the chaos of his life. "Not what it looks like," Ethan whispered. Mrs. Chen's expression said she'd heard that before, but she just nodded. "Jamie's asleep, was an angel, did his homework, ate his dinner, brushed his teeth without being asked. Thank you, really, I'll pay you Friday." She waved him off. "You know where I am if you need help with—" She gestured vaguely at the unconscious woman Ethan was supporting. "It's just for tonight." Mrs. Chen's look suggested she'd heard that before too, but she disappeared back into her apartment without comment. Ethan's apartment was exactly what 2,300 square feet in a building that should have been condemned years ago bought you. A narrow living room that flowed into a galley kitchen with appliances from 1987, one bedroom where Jamie slept surrounded by secondhand books and a carefully maintained collection of drawings, and a second bedroom that was really a converted storage closet where Ethan kept a mattress on the floor and clothes in cardboard boxes. He guided the woman to his worn couch, the same one he'd found on a curb 4 years ago, and hauled up 3 flights of stairs in summer heat. She collapsed into it like all her strings had been cut, immediately curling on her side. Ethan stood there for a moment, watching her breathe, wondering what the hell he'd just done. Then he grabbed the only decent blanket he owned, the one usually reserved for Jamie during winter months, and draped it over her carefully, moved her purse to the coffee table, positioned a mixing bowl within reach in case she got sick. In the kitchen, he poured a glass of water and set it on the table next to 2 aspirin. Did a quick inventory of his refrigerator, eggs, milk for Jamie's breakfast, some leftover rice, half a loaf of bread. Enough for morning, assuming his unexpected guest could eat anything. The clock on the microwave read 1:17 a.m. 4 hours until he had to be awake for his rideshare shift. He should sleep. Should grab whatever rest was available before the cycle started again. Instead, he found himself in Jamie's doorway, watching his son sleep. 8 years old, dark hair sticking up in every direction, one arm hanging off the bed because he always sprawled like he was claiming territory in his dreams. He looked peaceful, safe. Unaware that his father had just brought a stranger home, had just made himself a target for men who'd promised consequences, had just complicated their precariously balanced life in ways that couldn't possibly end well. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered to his sleeping son. "I'm sorry I can't just walk away." He retreated to his closet bedroom, but sleep felt impossible. He lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling with its water stains that looked like continents on a map to nowhere, and thought about the woman breathing softly in his living room. Thought about how she'd said, "Nobody gives a damn," like it was a truth she'd learned too well. Thought about her phone full of professional contacts and empty of friends. Thought about expensive clothes that couldn't keep her warm and a position that couldn't keep her safe. Thought about how sometimes the people who looked like they had everything were actually just better at hiding the nothing. His last thought before exhaustion took him was a question that would matter more than he could have imagined. Who was she really, this woman he'd saved, and what had he actually rescued her from? Ethan woke to the sound of retching. His phone showed 3:47 a.m. He'd slept maybe 2 hours. He stumbled out of his room to find the woman on her knees in his bathroom, heaving into the toilet while her body shook with the effort. Her platinum hair was matted with sweat, makeup smeared across her face in dark streaks. He grabbed a washcloth, ran it under cold water, and knelt beside her without speaking. When the retching subsided, he handed it to her. She pressed it to her face with shaking hands. "Where?" Her voice was raw, confused. "Who are you?" "Someone who kept 2 men from making your night a lot worse," Ethan said quietly. "You're safe. You're in my apartment. I'll take you home as soon as you're steady enough to tell me where home is." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw the moment recognition failed. Saw her trying to place him, trying to remember anything after the bar, coming up empty. "I don't," panic edged into her voice. "I don't remember. Oh, God, did we?" "No," Ethan said firmly. "Nothing happened. You got too drunk. Some men were taking advantage. I intervened. I tried calling people from your phone, but no one answered, so I brought you here because it was safer than the alternatives. That's all." She studied his face, looking for lies, finding none. Her shoulders sagged with relief so profound it looked painful. "I'm Victoria," she said finally. Then stronger. "Victoria Hale." And there it was, the confirmation of what he'd suspected. Victoria Hale. As in Hale Industries, the company where he worked nights as a security guard, walking empty corridors for $15 an hour. As in the CEO, whose photo hung in the lobby, whose name appeared on every internal memo, whose reputation for ruthless business decisions was legendary among the night staff who cleaned up after her empire. "Ethan Cole," he replied, because there was nothing else to do but continue forward. "I work security at your building, night shift." Her eyes widened. "You work for me?" "For your company. I very much doubt you know I exist." Something complicated crossed her face. Shame, maybe, or recognition of a truth she didn't like. She started to speak. Then her body rebelled again, and she was back over the toilet. Ethan waited. When she finished, he said, "There's water and aspirin on the coffee table. You should try to keep something down. I have eggs, if you think you can handle it." "Why are you being kind to me?" The question came out raw. "You don't know me. I'm nobody to you." "You're somebody who needed help," Ethan said simply. "That's enough." He left her in the bathroom and moved to the kitchen, pulling out eggs and bread on autopilot. The sky outside his window was still black, but the first hints of gray were creeping in at the edges. Somewhere in the city, garbage trucks were starting their routes. Somewhere, his first rideshare customer was probably waking up, checking their phone, requesting a ride. He'd have to cancel. Had to stay here. Had to make sure she was okay. Had to deal with whatever complications this night had created. The cost of that decision, lost wages from canceled shifts, sat in his chest like a stone. But heavier was the knowledge that she'd been alone in that bar, drunk and vulnerable, surrounded by predators, and not one person from her presumably extensive professional network had answered their phone. Victoria emerged from the bathroom 10 minutes later, moving carefully, her face pale but composed. She'd used the washcloth to remove most of her makeup, revealing features that were striking in their severity. High cheekbones, sharp jaw, eyes that probably missed nothing when they weren't clouded with alcohol. "Sit," Ethan said, gesturing to his second-hand table. "Scrambled eggs, dry toast, best hangover food there is." She sat like someone not accustomed to being told what to do, but too shaky to argue. He placed the food in front of her along with more water. "Eat slowly," he instructed. If you can keep that down for 20 minutes, we'll try coffee. You sound like you've done this before. College had its moments. She took a small bite, testing her stomach's tolerance. College? Where? MIT, mechanical engineering. He said it casually, like it didn't matter, like that life wasn't buried under years of survival. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. MIT. Long time ago. Different life. And now you're doing what I need to do to keep my son fed and housed, Ethan finished. We all make choices. She ate in silence for a while, and he could see her processing, calculating, trying to reconcile the security guard with MIT engineering program. He'd seen that look before, from people who assumed they knew everything about a person from their current position. Your son, she said finally. How old? 8. Jamie. He's asleep in the bedroom. And his mother? Died when he was 2. Complications from pneumonia that we caught too late because we didn't have insurance. The words came out flat, factual. He'd learned to say them without emotion, without letting people see the guilt that still lived in his chest. The knowledge that better insurance might have meant earlier treatment, might have meant Sarah was still here. Victoria set down her fork. I'm sorry. Me too. The kitchen clock ticked through the silence. Outside, the sky was definitely getting lighter. 4:32 a.m. In 28 minutes, he was supposed to be in his car, starting the rideshare app, catching early airport runs. I should call someone, Victoria said. Get out of your way. You've been incredibly kind, and I've disrupted your... Who are you going to call? Ethan asked gently. I tried everyone in your contacts. No one answered. The words hit her visibly. She picked up her phone, scrolling through with increasing agitation. Marcus always answers. He's my assistant. He's supposed to... She dialed. It rang. Voicemail. He probably thinks I'm still at the bar, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Or that I went home. I was supposed to have a meeting tonight, a dinner with potential investors, but I canceled. Told everyone I was handling it personally. Went to that bar instead. Why? She looked up at him, and for a moment her carefully maintained composure cracked. Because it was my husband's birthday. Ex-husband. And I didn't want to be in my empty penthouse remembering how everything fell apart. Because I'm 40 years old, and I've built an empire, and I have no one to celebrate with. Because sometimes the loneliness is so loud I have to drown it in vodka just to make it through the night. The honesty was so raw, so unexpected, that Ethan had no response. He just pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. How long were you married? 12 years. He left 3 years ago for his 25-year-old secretary. Every cliché in the book. Took half my money in the divorce, which was still enough to set him up for life. Now he's in the Bahamas with his new wife and their baby, posting pictures of sunset boat rides while I work 90-hour weeks keeping the company alive. Kids? We tried. It didn't work. Turns out I'm excellent at building businesses and terrible at building families. She pushed the eggs around her plate. And now I'm unloading my pathetic life story on a stranger who's shown me more kindness in 6 hours than most people I've known for years. You're not pathetic, Ethan said quietly. You're human. There's a difference. She looked at him like he'd said something in a language she'd forgotten she knew. The moment was broken by a sound from the bedroom, a sleepy voice calling out, Dad? Ethan stood quickly. That's Jamie. I should... Go, Victoria said. I'm okay. I'm better. He found his son sitting up in bed, hair catastrophically tangled, rubbing his eyes with small fists. Hey, buddy, you're up early. I heard talking. Are you leaving for work? Not yet. We have a guest, someone who needed help last night. Jamie's eyes went wide with the kind of dramatic curiosity only 8-year-olds could manage. A guest? Here? Is it an emergency? Was an emergency. It's okay now, but I need you to do me a favor. I need you to stay in here for a little bit, okay? Read one of your books. Give our guest some privacy. Is it a lady? Jamie's whisper was theatrical. Mrs. Chen said she saw you with a lady. Mrs. Chen needs to mind her business, Ethan said, but without heat. Yes, it's a lady. She was in trouble, and I helped her. That's what we do, remember? We help people when they need it. Like how you helped Mr. Kowalski when his car broke down? Exactly like that. Is she nice? I think so, but she's not feeling well, so we're being quiet and respectful. Jamie nodded seriously, already reaching for one of his beloved books about space exploration. I'll read about Mars. Did you know that one day on Mars is only 40 minutes longer than one day on Earth? But a year on Mars is 687 Earth days, so that's fascinating, buddy, Ethan interrupted gently. Tell me all about it later, okay? Back in the kitchen, Victoria had managed to eat most of the eggs and looked significantly more stable. She'd also noticed the stack of overdue bills on the counter, the ones Ethan kept meaning to hide but never quite got around to. I should pay you, she said. For the help? For the food? For... I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Ethan considered that. What did he want? Sleep? Security? A life where one emergency didn't threaten to topple everything. A world where his brilliant son could dream about Mars without worrying about whether they'd make rent. I want you to get home safe, he said instead. That's all. She stood, still a bit unsteady but improving by the minute. I live in the Parkview Towers, penthouse level. I can call a car service. I'll drive you, Ethan said. My shift doesn't start for another hour anyway. It was a lie. His shift was already 15 minutes gone, but some things mattered more than money. The drive to Parkview Towers took 20 minutes through morning traffic that was just beginning to build. Victoria sat in the passenger seat, looking out at the city waking up, the duct-taped door a physical reminder of the distance between their worlds. You know those men last night? She said suddenly. The ones at the bar. One of them said he was VP of operations at your company. Gerald Hutchins. Her voice had gone cold. And the other was probably Dennis Kramer, VP of sales. They're both married, both on my executive team, both apparently predators. You gonna do something about that? Monday morning, they're done. It wasn't a threat, it was a fact, delivered with the certainty of someone accustomed to having her decisions become reality. I won't tolerate that behavior in my company. They pulled up to Parkview Towers, and Ethan finally understood the scope of the divide. The building was all glass and steel, modern architecture that screamed wealth, a doorman in uniform already moving to open doors, an awning that probably cost more than Ethan's annual income. Victoria reached for the door handle, then paused. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why did you help me? Really? You could have walked past, could have called the police, could have left me to figure it out. But you didn't. You brought me into your home, fed me, took care of me. Why? Ethan thought about Jamie, about teaching his son that the world could be kind, even when it rarely showed kindness in return. Thought about Sarah and promises made at bedsides about being better, about raising their son to see people as people. Because everyone deserves someone who gives a damn, he said simply, even when they think nobody does. Victoria's eyes glistened, but she blinked it back. Thank you, Ethan Cole. I won't forget this. She climbed out, steadier now, and walked toward her building without looking back. The doorman greeted her with professional familiarity, and then she disappeared into the lobby, back into her world of penthouses and power. Ethan sat in his car for a long moment, watching the building, knowing he'd never see her again. People like Victoria Hale didn't maintain connections with people like him. This was a momentary intersection of lives that would never cross again. He was wrong, but he wouldn't know that until Monday morning, when he showed up for his security shift and found his entire world turned inside out by a woman who'd meant it when she said she wouldn't forget. For now, he just drove home, climbed 3 flights of stairs, and found Jamie at the kitchen table, already dressed for school, eating cereal. Is the lady okay? Jamie asked. Yeah, buddy, she's okay. Good, because that's what we do, right? We help people. Right, Ethan agreed, pulling his son into a hug. That's exactly what we do. He had no idea that this simple act of decency would become the catalyst for everything that followed. The revelation, the accusation, the trial, and finally the transformation that would prove some walls were only waiting for the right person to tear them down. The weekend passed in its usual blur of exhaustion and careful rationing. Jamie's soccer practice on Saturday morning, grocery shopping with coupons clipped from the Sunday paper, meal prep that stretched ingredients as far as they could go, and 3 more shifts that left Ethan running on fumes and determination. By Sunday night, the strange encounter with Victoria Hale felt almost dreamlike, something that had happened to someone else in some parallel version of his life. Monday morning arrived with November rain hammering against his bedroom window. Ethan woke at 4, made Jamie's lunch, left a note reminding his son to lock the door when Mrs. Chen picked him up for school, and headed out into the darkness. The rideshare shift went smoothly. Airport runs mostly. Business travelers who didn't talk much, which suited him fine. The warehouse shift was brutal, unloading trucks in the rain, his lower back screaming by hour 3. By the time he arrived at Hale Industries for his security shift at 9 p.m., he was already counting down the hours until he could collapse on his mattress. The building rose 40 stories into the Seattle skyline, all gleaming glass and architectural ambition. Ethan used his employee badge at the service entrance, nodding to Marcus Washington, the day shift supervisor who was preparing to leave. "Cole," Marcus said, his usual greeting. Then he paused, studying Ethan with unusual intensity. "You okay, man? You look worse than usual." "Long day. I'm good." "Yeah, well, heads up, there's been some changes. Corporate sent down new protocols this afternoon. Something about executive restructuring. Gerald Hutchins and Dennis Kramer both got walked out this morning. Security escorted them and everything." Ethan's stomach dropped. The two men from the bar. Victoria had meant it when she said they'd be done. "They say why?" Marcus shrugged. "Above my pay grade. But the rumor is misconduct, personal behavior issues, whatever that means." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "Anyway, building's mostly empty tonight. Couple late meetings on 16 and 23, but otherwise just you and the janitors. Easy night." Except it wasn't. Ethan had barely started his first floor sweep when his radio crackled. "Cole, this is Central. You're needed in the executive suite, 40th floor." He keyed the radio. "Copy that. What's the situation?" "No situation. You've got a visitor. Says she's expecting you." "A visitor. At 9:30 on a Monday night. In the executive suite?" The elevator ride to 40 felt longer than it should have, his reflection in the polished doors showing a man in a uniform 2 sizes too large, dark circles under his eyes. The physical manifestation of 3 jobs and 0 margin for error. What could Victoria possibly want? To thank him again? To slip him some money that he'd already decided he wouldn't accept? The elevator doors opened, and Ethan stepped into a world he'd only seen during his orientation. The executive suite occupied the entire 40th floor, open-plan workspaces for assistants and junior executives surrounding a core of private offices with floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city that probably cost more per month than most people made in a year. At this hour, the space was empty except for one office at the far end, light spilling from its open door. He walked across carpet so thick it absorbed sound, past desks arranged with geometric precision, toward that rectangle of light. As he approached, he could hear Victoria's voice, sharp and focused, nothing like the broken woman from Friday night. "I don't care what the board thinks, Marcus. The decision is final. If they want to challenge me, they know where to find my office." "Yes, tomorrow at 9. Have the documentation ready." Ethan paused in the doorway. Victoria sat behind a desk that was probably worth more than his car, her platinum hair pulled back in a severe bun, wearing a charcoal suit that screamed authority. She looked like she'd never been drunk in her life, never been vulnerable, never needed anyone. Then she looked up and saw him, and something in her expression softened. "Marcus, I need to go. We'll continue this in the morning." She ended the call and stood, coming around the desk. "Ethan, thank you for coming up." "Ma'am, I was just—" "Victoria," she interrupted. "Please. After you've seen someone at their worst, formal titles feel ridiculous." He stayed in the doorway, uncertain. "I heard about Hutchins and Kramer." "Good. I want everyone to hear about them. I want it known that behavior like theirs has no place in this company." She gestured to the chairs facing her desk. "Sit, please." Ethan sat, feeling the quality of the leather under him, wondering how many months of his salary were represented in this single piece of furniture. Victoria returned to her chair, but instead of putting the desk between them, she pulled it around to sit facing him directly. "I spent the weekend thinking," she said, "about Friday night, about what you did, about what you didn't ask for in return." I didn't do anything that— You did everything that most people wouldn't, she interrupted. And then I thought about what you told me. MIT. Mechanical engineering. And I looked you up. Ethan's jaw tightened. You investigated me? I researched you. There's a difference. She pulled out a folder, an actual physical folder, in an age of tablets and screens. Ethan Cole, graduated MIT with honors, thesis on renewable energy systems integration, published 2 papers that are still being cited, job offers from 3 major firms, and then nothing. You disappeared from the professional world completely. My wife got sick, Ethan said, his voice flat. We had a 2-year-old, medical bills, no insurance. I took the first job I could find that paid immediately. Then she died, and I had Jamie, and surviving became more important than career planning. You were 24 when she died. 25. But who's counting? Victoria leaned forward. Do you know what we're working on right now? What's consuming half my R&D budget and producing exactly 0 results? No, ma'am. Victoria, I walk empty hallways. I don't get briefed on company strategy. Smart building integration systems, adaptive energy management that can predict usage patterns and optimize in real time. We've been developing it for 3 years. We've invested $40 million, and we're nowhere close to a working prototype. She opened the folder, pulling out pages covered in sketches and equations. Ethan's chest tightened. These were his notebooks, the ones he kept in his apartment, the ones he filled during Jamie's soccer practices and late nights when sleep wouldn't come, the private space where he still let himself be the engineer he used to be. Where did you get those? His voice came out harder than intended. From your apartment. Friday night, while you were putting Jamie to bed, I saw them on your bookshelf. I took photos. She held up a hand against his rising objection. I know. It was a violation of privacy. I apologize. But Ethan, do you understand what these are? They're notes, ideas, nothing practical. They're the solution to a $40 million problem. She spread the pages across her desk. This integration algorithm you sketched out, it's elegant, sophisticated. It's exactly what my team has been failing to develop for 3 years. And you did it in a notebook during your spare time. Ethan stared at the pages, at his own handwriting, at ideas he'd never imagined anyone would see. Those are just theoretical. I haven't built anything, haven't tested. I had my chief engineer review them over the weekend, anonymously. He said whoever designed this system understands energy dynamics at a level he rarely sees. He asked where I found them. What did you tell him? That I'd hired a consultant, which brings me to why you're here. Victoria stood, moving to the window. The city lights spread below her like a circuit board. I want to offer you a position, senior systems engineer, salary of $150,000 to start, full benefits, equity package. Your job would be to take these designs from theoretical to practical, to build what my team hasn't been able to. The number hit Ethan like a physical blow, $150,000, more than he currently made in a year from all 3 jobs combined, enough to get Jamie into a better school, enough for an apartment where the heat worked consistently, enough to stop choosing between groceries and medication. I can't, he heard himself say. Victoria turned from the window. Can't or won't. I don't have time to build anything. I have 3 jobs. I have a son who needs me. I can't just— You'd quit the other jobs. This would be your only position. 9 to 5, flexible hours when Jamie needs you, full health coverage, dental, vision, the comprehensive plan, 4 weeks paid vacation. She returned to her chair, her gaze intense. Ethan, I'm offering you your life back. Why? The question came out raw. You don't know me. You don't know if I can actually do this. Those notebooks could be wrong, could be incomplete, could fail the moment they meet reality. You're right. I don't know for certain, but I know you helped a stranger when it cost you money you couldn't afford to lose. I know you brought someone you didn't trust into your home because the alternative was leaving them in danger. I know you've kept your mind sharp enough to solve problems that multi-million-dollar teams can't crack, even while working yourself into the ground just to survive. She leaned forward. And I know that talent like yours shouldn't be wasted walking hallways at night. So yes, it's partially gratitude. But it's also good business. I need what you can do. Ethan looked at his hands, calloused from warehouse work, stained from changing oil in his rideshare car, shaking slightly from exhaustion that had become his baseline state. Could he do this? Could he actually return to engineering after 8 years of survival mode? Could he risk the stability of 3 small incomes for the promise of one large one that might not work out? I need to think about it, he said finally. Of course. Take 24 hours, but Ethan, Victoria's voice softened. Don't let fear make you choose poverty over potential. I know it's safer to keep doing what you're doing. I know change is terrifying when you're responsible for someone else's well-being. But ask yourself, is this the life you want Jamie to see? His brilliant father, working himself to death, never using the gifts that could change both your lives. The words stung because they were true. How many times had Jamie asked why Daddy was always tired? How many school events had Ethan missed because he was covering a shift? How many times had his son seen him choose survival over dreams? 24 hours, Victoria confirmed. Then I need an answer. Ethan stood, his legs feeling uncertain beneath him. The other security guards, if I leave, who covers my shifts? We'll hire someone. That's not your problem to solve. And if this doesn't work out, if I can't deliver what you think I can, then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I don't think it will. She extended her hand. Take the night. Talk to Jamie. Sleep on it. But remember, sometimes the biggest risk is not taking one. He shook her hand, feeling the certainty in her grip, and left the office in a daze. The elevator ride down felt like descending from one reality into another. By the time he reached the ground floor, his radio was crackling again. A door alarm on the 3rd floor that turned out to be a janitor who'd propped it open for his cleaning cart. The rest of the shift passed in mechanical routine, but Ethan's mind was 40 floors up, trapped in a conversation that might change everything. 150,000. Benefits. His life back. The chance to be an engineer again instead of just someone who used to be one. But also, what if he failed? What if the notebooks were the delusions of an exhausted mind, ideas that looked good on paper but collapsed under professional scrutiny? What if he took this job and disappointed Victoria, disappointed the team, proved that 8 years away had eroded skills he'd never get back? By the time his shift ended at 5 a.m., he decided nothing except that he needed to talk to the only person whose opinion mattered more than his own fears. Jamie was still asleep when Ethan got home, curled around his favorite stuffed astronaut, one sock on, and one sock mysteriously vanished during the night. Ethan watched him breathe, thought about all the possibilities a 6-figure salary could create, and felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Terrifying, dangerous, potentially devastating hope. He made breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, the last of the orange juice. When Jamie emerged at 6:30, hair catastrophic and eyes squinting against the kitchen light, Ethan had coffee brewing and decisions weighing heavy on his chest. Morning, buddy. Sleep okay? I had a dream about Mars again, Jamie said, climbing into his chair. Except this time, I was building a house there. A real house with rooms and everything. Is that possible, Dad? Could people really live on Mars someday? Someday, yeah. Smart people are working on it. Like engineers? Exactly like engineers. Jamie poured too much syrup on his toast, creating a small pond that would absolutely stain the table. Normally, Ethan would correct him, but this morning he just watched his son eat with the unselfconscious enthusiasm of someone who'd never worried about money or medical bills or whether dreams were luxuries they couldn't afford. Jamie, I need to ask you something. His son looked up, syrup on his chin. Okay. What if I told you I might be able to get a different job? One where I'd only work during the day, when you're at school, where I'd be home for dinner every night, where I could come to all your soccer games. Jamie's eyes went wide. Really? You could do that? Maybe, but it would be a big change, and changes can be scary. What do you think? I think... Jamie considered this with the gravity of someone much older. I think you should do it, because then you wouldn't be so tired all the time. And we could do more stuff together, like go to the science museum. You always say we'll go, but then you have to work. You wouldn't miss me being home when you wake up? I'd miss that, Jamie admitted. But I'd rather have you not sad. I'm not sad, buddy. Yes, you are. Not all the time. But sometimes I see you looking at your old books, the ones with all the numbers and drawings, and you get this face like you lost something important. He took another bite of toast. Mrs. Chen says everybody deserves to do what makes them happy, even dads. Ethan felt something crack in his chest. When did you get so smart? I was always smart. You just don't always notice because you're tired. Out of the mouths of 8-year-olds came truth that adults spent years avoiding. Ethan drove Jamie to school, walked him to the entrance, watched him disappear into the building with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. Then he sat in his car in the parking lot, pulled out his phone, and called the number Victoria had given him. She answered on the first ring. Ethan? I'll do it, he said. I'll take the job, but I have conditions. I'm listening. If it doesn't work, if the designs fail, if I can't deliver, I want you to give me 2 weeks' notice, not immediate termination. 2 weeks so I can find something else before we're completely without income. Agreed. And I need flexibility for Jamie. School events, doctor's appointments, emergencies. He comes first, always. Understood. Anything else? Yeah. I want to meet the team before I start. I want to see what they've already built, understand where they got stuck. I'm not coming in as some savior. I'm coming in as someone who might have a piece of the puzzle, but who needs to work with people who've been fighting this problem for years. There was a pause, and when Victoria spoke again, her voice held something like respect. You know, most people offered this kind of opportunity would just take it and figure out the details later. I'm not most people. Can't afford to be. No, she agreed. You can't, which is exactly why I want you. When can you start? I need to give 2 weeks' notice at my other jobs. Can we do December 1st? We can do better than that. I'll pay you for the next 2 weeks while you transition. Your start date is today. Victoria's school, consider it a signing bonus. You'll need professional clothes. You'll need time to arrange childcare for different hours. You'll need to actually sleep for the first time in years. Take the money, Ethan. Let yourself accept help for once. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of years of refusal, of pride, of determination to do everything himself finally beginning to shift. Okay, he said quietly. Okay. Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring your notebooks, all of them. We'll meet with the engineering team at 10. And Ethan? Yeah? Welcome to Hale Industries, the real version this time. He hung up and sat in the parking lot for another 10 minutes, letting it sink in. He had a job, a real job, the kind he'd trained for, the kind that used his mind instead of just his capacity to endure, the kind that might actually change everything. He drove to the warehouse, found his supervisor, and gave notice. The man barely looked up from his clipboard, just said, "Fine, we'll process your final check," like people disappeared from his workforce every day, which they probably did. The rideshare company was even easier. He just deactivated his account, deleted the app, and wondered how many thousands of miles he'd driven in the past 8 years, how many strangers he'd transported while his own life went nowhere. By the time he returned home, it was 2 p.m. He had 6 hours before his final security shift started. He should sleep, should rest, should conserve energy. Instead, he pulled out every notebook he'd ever kept, spread them across his kitchen table, and started organizing. Systems integration, energy optimization, predictive algorithms, 8 years of ideas captured in stolen moments, thoughts too valuable to lose even when everything else was falling apart. He was still working when Mrs. Chen knocked on his door at 3:30, earlier than usual to pick up Jamie. "You look different," she said, studying him with eyes that missed nothing. Something happened. "I got a new job." Her weathered face split into a smile that transformed it. "A good job?" "A very good job." "About time. That boy of yours deserves a father who gets to be happy, and you deserve more than survival." She squeezed his arm. "I'll get Jamie from school. You keep doing whatever you're doing. You look alive for the first time in years." That evening, over dinner that was actually eaten at the table instead of snatched between shifts, Ethan told Jamie everything. About Victoria, about the job, about what it would mean for them. "So you'll be an engineer again?" Jamie's eyes shone. "Like the kind who builds things?" "Like the kind who builds things." "That's so cool, Dad. Can you build a robot? I've always wanted a robot." "Let's start with energy systems and see where that takes us." but maybe eventually a robot. Maybe eventually. That night, his last security shift felt like walking through a life he was leaving behind. The empty corridors, the flickering lights, the loneliness of 3 a.m. in a building designed for thousands, but occupied by one. He'd spent countless hours here, walking and thinking, dreaming and surviving, being invisible to everyone except the janitors who worked the same forgotten hours. At 4 a.m., he paused on the 40th floor, looking out at the city from the executive suite's windows. Tomorrow, he'd walk these floors as someone different, someone with purpose, someone whose mind mattered as much as his capacity to show up and endure. He thought about Victoria, about her emptiness and her kindness, about how she'd seen value where everyone else saw only a uniform and a forgettable face. Thought about how one night of choosing decency over convenience had somehow become a doorway to everything he'd lost. By the time his shift ended at 5 a.m., the sun was beginning to rise over Seattle, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that he usually missed because he was too exhausted to notice. But this morning, he stood in the parking lot and watched it happen, letting himself feel something he'd forbidden for 8 years. Gratitude. For Victoria's faith. For Jamie's wisdom. For the possibility that life could be more than just survival, that dreams deferred weren't necessarily dreams destroyed, that sometimes the walls we build to protect ourselves are exactly what keep us trapped. He drove home as the city woke around him, past the bar where it had all started, past the warehouse where he'd just worked his last shift, past the school where his son would learn that fathers could change, could grow, could prove that giving up and giving in were two entirely different things. When he climbed the 3 flights to his apartment, he wasn't thinking about the stairs he wouldn't have to climb forever, or the better place they'd eventually afford. He was thinking about the notebooks waiting on his kitchen table, about problems that needed solving, about the chance to prove that 8 years hadn't erased who he really was. It had only taught him how to fight for it. Ethan arrived at Hale Industries at 8:45 the next morning wearing clothes he'd purchased at a discount store the previous afternoon. Khaki slacks that almost fit, a button-down shirt still creased from the package, shoes that weren't work boots or running sneakers for the first time in years. He felt like an imposter playing dress-up, like someone who'd borrowed someone else's life and hoped no one would notice the seams showing. The lobby looked different during business hours. Where night shifts had shown him empty marble floors and silent elevators, morning revealed the building's true nature, a hive of purposeful activity. Men and women in expensive suits moved with the confidence of people who belonged, who never questioned their right to occupy space in buildings like this. They swiped security badges without breaking stride, spoke into phones about meetings and deals and opportunities, inhabited their professional lives like fish in water. Ethan approached the security desk where he'd checked in 100 times before, except this time he wasn't wearing the uniform that had made him invisible. The guard on duty, Stephen, who'd shared the occasional late-night coffee, looked up and did a double-take. "Cole? That you, man?" "Hey, Stephen. I'm here to see Victoria Hale. She should have..." Yeah, you're on the list. Executive suite, 40th floor." Stephen's expression cycled through confusion and curiosity before landing on something like respect. "Heard you were moving up. Congrats." "Thanks." Ethan took the temporary badge Stephen slid across the counter, feeling the weight of change in that small plastic rectangle. The elevator ride up felt longer than it had the previous night, probably because now he was sharing it with people who belonged. A woman in her 50s with severe glasses and an air of impatience kept glancing at his discount store outfit with thinly veiled judgment. 2 younger men in matching navy suits discussed a client presentation with the easy familiarity of people who'd never questioned whether they deserved their positions. Ethan stood in the corner, clutching the bag containing his notebooks, and reminded himself that he'd earned his place here. Victoria had seen something in those designs. Her chief engineer had confirmed their value. This wasn't charity. This was recognition of ability that had been waiting 8 years to be used. The executive suite looked different in daylight, too. The open workspace was populated now. Assistants at desks, junior executives in glass-walled offices, the quiet hum of productive work. Several people looked up as Ethan emerged from the elevator, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. He could practically hear their thoughts. Who was this guy in the cheap clothes, and why was he on the executive floor? Victoria's assistant, a sharp-eyed man in his early 30s who could only be Marcus, rose from his desk as Ethan approached. "Mr. Cole, Miss Hale is expecting you. Go right in." Victoria's office was exactly as Ethan remembered. Floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture that probably cost six figures, the kind of space designed to intimidate. But Victoria herself looked less severe than she had the previous night. She'd traded the charcoal suit for navy, and her hair was pulled back less severely. When she saw him, she smiled with what looked like genuine warmth. "Ethan, right on time." She came around the desk, extending her hand. "How are you feeling?" "Terrified," he admitted. "But ready." "Good. Terror means you understand the stakes. Overconfidence would worry me." She gestured to the chairs. "Sit. We have about 20 minutes before the team meeting. I want to prepare you for what's coming." Ethan sat, placing his bag of notebooks on the floor beside him. "What am I walking into?" "Frustration, mainly. My engineering team has been working on the smart building integration system for 3 years. They're brilliant people, MIT, Stanford, Caltech graduates, and they've made progress, but they keep hitting walls. The system works in isolated components but fails when they try to integrate everything. They're exhausted, they're defensive, and they're about to meet someone who might have solved problems they've been unable to crack. They're going to hate me." "Some of them will," Victoria agreed, "at least initially. But that's not your problem. Your job is to help them succeed, not to make them like you. Though if you can manage both, that's even better." She leaned forward. "The team lead is Dr. Sarah Chen. She's been with the company for 12 years, holds 6 patents, and takes her work very personally. She's going to be your biggest challenge and potentially your strongest ally." "Any advice on handling her?" "Respect her expertise. Don't come in acting like you have all the answers. You have pieces of the puzzle, valuable pieces, but she and her team have been living inside this problem for years. They know things you don't. Make it collaborative, not competitive." Ethan nodded, his mind already spinning through approach strategies. "What about the technical side? What specifically have they built?" Victoria pulled up schematics on her tablet, and for the next 15 minutes, she walked him through the system architecture. The team had created sophisticated predictive algorithms for energy usage, had developed sensors that could track occupancy and environmental conditions in real time, had built machine learning models that theoretically should optimize building systems automatically. Everything worked individually. Nothing worked together. "The integration is where it breaks down," Victoria explained. "The components communicate, but they don't anticipate each other. There's no unified intelligence coordinating the whole system. It reacts instead of predicts." Ethan thought about his notebooks, about the coordination algorithms he'd sketched out during Jamie's soccer practices, about the way he'd approached the problem not as separate systems, but as a single organism with interconnected needs. "I might have something for that," he said carefully, "but I need to see what they've built. Need to understand why they made the architectural choices they did." "Which is exactly what we're about to do." Victoria stood, checking her watch. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." The engineering lab occupied the entire 35th floor. Where the executive suite was all clean lines and expensive minimalism, the lab was controlled chaos, workbenches covered in circuit boards and prototype devices, whiteboards filled with equations and system diagrams, the smell of solder and coffee and intensity. A dozen people in various states of professional dress moved through the space with the purposeful energy of people working on problems that mattered. Victoria led Ethan to a glass-walled conference room where 5 people were already seated. At the head of the table sat a woman in her early 40s, Asian, with sharp features and sharper eyes, wearing a Stanford hoodie over dress pants like someone who'd given up pretending to care about corporate dress codes. Dr. Sarah Chen, almost certainly. "Team," Victoria said as they entered, "I want to introduce Ethan Cole. As I mentioned in my email yesterday, Ethan is joining us as Senior Systems Engineer. He'll be working specifically on the integration challenges we've been facing with the building automation project." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Chen's expression remained professionally neutral, but her eyes were calculating, measuring, finding Ethan lacking in ways he could feel even from across the room. "Senior Systems Engineer," Dr. Chen repeated, her tone carefully controlled. "That's interesting. I don't recall being consulted about hiring for my team." "It was a direct hire. Victoria said smoothly. Ethan's background and approach to integration architecture align perfectly with our current needs. His background. Dr. Chen turned her attention fully to Ethan. Mr. Cole, where did you work before this? The room went silent. Ethan could feel everyone watching, waiting to see how he'd navigate this obvious test. I haven't worked as an engineer in 8 years, he said simply. Before that, I had a brief stint at a renewable energy startup that folded during the financial crisis. Before that, I graduated from MIT with a focus on mechanical engineering and energy systems. 8 years. A younger man to Dr. Chen's left, late 20s, expensive watch, condescending smile, leaned back in his chair. So you've been out of the field for nearly a decade, and Victoria's bringing you in at a senior level to solve problems we've been working on full-time. Does that seem reasonable to anyone else? James? Victoria's voice held a warning. No, it's a fair question, Ethan said. You're right to be skeptical. I would be too. All I can tell you is that I've kept current with developments in the field. I've been working on related problems in my spare time, and I have some ideas about integration architecture that might be useful. But I'm not here to replace anyone or to diminish what you've already accomplished. I'm here to contribute if I can. Doctor. Chen studied him with the intensity of someone reading equations. Victoria, can we have the room for a moment? It wasn't a question. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. She left, closing the glass door behind her. Through the transparent wall, Ethan could see her speaking with Marcus, deliberately not looking back at the conference room where he was about to be dissected. Dr. Chen waited until Victoria was out of earshot before speaking. Let's be direct, Mr. Cole. I don't know what relationship you have with Victoria that convinced her to hire you, and frankly, I don't care. What I care about is that my team has been working 16-hour days for 3 years, that we're on the verge of a breakthrough, and that suddenly someone with no recent professional experience gets dropped into a senior position. So before we waste everyone's time, why don't you tell us what you actually bring to this table? The other 4 team members watched with varying expressions of curiosity and hostility. James, the young man with the condescending smile, looked like he was enjoying the confrontation. An older woman with gray streaks in her dark hair seemed more sympathetic but equally skeptical. The 2 others, a South Asian man in his 30s and a young woman who couldn't be more than 25, just looked exhausted, like they'd been beaten down by the problem so many times they couldn't muster emotion about it anymore. Ethan reached for his bag, pulling out the stack of notebooks. For the past 8 years, while I was working 3 jobs to support my son, I kept working on engineering problems. Not for money, not for career advancement, just because I couldn't stop thinking about them. Energy systems integration, predictive modeling, coordination algorithms, problems I found interesting. He spread several notebooks across the table, opening them to specific pages. You said your system components work individually, but fail on integration. Based on what Victoria showed me of your architecture, I think I know why. You're treating each subsystem as independent with communication protocols, but what you actually need is unified anticipatory coordination. The building isn't multiple systems talking to each other, it's one organism with interconnected needs that have to be balanced in real time against predicted future states. Dr. Chen pulled one of the notebooks closer, her eyes scanning the equations and diagrams. Her expression shifted from skepticism to interest to something that looked almost like hunger. This coordination matrix, she said, pointing to a page filled with Ethan's handwriting. How are you accounting for temporal lag between prediction and implementation? Tiered prediction horizons. Near-term predictions with high confidence drive immediate adjustments, while longer-term predictions with lower confidence influence strategic positioning. The system doesn't just react or predict, it continuously optimizes across multiple timescales simultaneously. James grabbed another notebook, flipping through pages with increasing agitation. This is theoretical. You can't know if this actually works without building it. You're right, Ethan agreed. These are untested ideas. They might fail completely when they meet reality. But theoretical is better than nothing, and from what I understand, you've been stuck for months. If my ideas help you move forward, great. If they don't, I'll figure out where I went wrong and try something else. The older woman leaned forward, her voice gentler than the others. I'm Dr. Patricia Martinez. I've been doing integration work for 20 years, and this approach, she gestured at the notebooks. It's not crazy. It's actually quite elegant, but the computational overhead would be massive. Not if you optimize the prediction algorithms, Ethan said, warming to the technical discussion. Most of the computational weight comes from trying to predict too many variables with too much precision. But buildings have patterns, occupancy rhythms, weather correlations, time of day variations. You can use those patterns to reduce the problem space dramatically. Dr. Chen was still reading, her finger tracing through equations like she was following a map to treasure. When she looked up, her expression had shifted from hostile to cautiously intrigued. "These are good," she said simply. "Not perfect. There are assumptions here that might not hold. But they're good. Better than anything we've tried recently." She looked at James, at Patricia, at the other two team members. "Thoughts?" The South Asian man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a British accent. "I'm Raj Patel. I handle the machine learning components. If we could actually get unified coordination working the way these notebooks suggest, it would solve about 6 problems we've been wrestling with. But implementation would be a nightmare." "Nightmares can be managed," Dr. Chen said. Then to Ethan, "Here's my concern. You have interesting ideas, but you've been out of active engineering for 8 years. You haven't worked with modern development tools, haven't managed large-scale system builds, haven't dealt with the reality of moving from theory to production. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to work with us, not above us. You'll contribute your ideas, but the team makes decisions collectively. You don't get to pull rank or run to Victoria when we push back on something. Can you handle that?" It was a test and a challenge and an offer all at once. Ethan recognized it for what it was, Dr. Chen protecting her team while leaving space for him to prove himself. "I wouldn't want it any other way," he said. "I'm rusty, I'm going to make mistakes, and I need your expertise as much as you might need my ideas. So yes, collaborative decisions, team-based approach. And if I start acting like I have all the answers, someone please remind me that 8 years ago, I couldn't even keep a startup from failing." Dr. Chen's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "Fair enough. Welcome to the team, Mr. Cole. Try to keep up." Victoria returned a few minutes later to find the atmosphere in the room transformed from hostile to cautiously productive. The team was passing around Ethan's notebooks, debating approaches, already beginning to integrate his ideas into their existing framework. "I see you've all introduced yourselves," Victoria said dryly. "We've established ground rules," Dr. Chen replied. "Ethan understands he's joining a team, not leading one. We'll give his ideas a fair evaluation, but we're not scrapping 3 years of work because someone sketched interesting equations in a notebook." "I wouldn't expect you to," Victoria said, "but I do expect you to maintain an open mind and recognize value wherever it comes from. Ethan, Dr. Chen will show you your workspace and get you set up with system access. Team, I want a progress update in 2 weeks. Let's see what happens when we add fresh perspective to hard work." She left, and Ethan was absorbed into the team's workflow like water into sand. Dr. Chen led him to a workstation near the main lab area, a desk with 3 monitors, a high-end workstation computer, and a view of the city that he'd only ever seen through windows he was paid to walk past. "You'll need to get up to speed on our development environment," Dr. Chen said, pulling up screens showing complex code bases and system architectures. "Patricia will walk you through what we've built. Raj will explain the machine learning components. James," she paused, giving Ethan a meaningful look. "James is brilliant but territorial. He doesn't trust easily. Give him space and prove yourself through work, not words." "Understood." "And Ethan?" Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. "I was hard on you in there. I had to be. This team has been through hell on this project, and they need to know I'll protect them from anyone who threatens their work, even someone Victoria personally hires. But those notebooks? They're real. If you can translate theory into reality, you might actually help us finish this thing." "I'll do my best." "Your best better be exceptional, because we're out of time. The board wants results by February, or they're killing the project. 3 months, Ethan. That's what we have to turn 3 years of failure into success." She walked away, leaving Ethan at his new desk, staring at monitors displaying code he didn't yet understand, surrounded by people who didn't yet trust him, facing a deadline that seemed impossible. He thought about Jamie that morning, eating breakfast and asking if Dad was going to build robots. thought about Victoria's faith in him, thought about 8 years of notebooks filled with ideas that had never had the chance to become real. Then he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. The first week was brutal. Ethan spent 12-hour days trying to understand systems the team had built over 3 years, learning development tools that hadn't existed when he'd last worked as an engineer, attending meetings where technical discussions moved at speeds that left him scrambling to keep up. He took work home, stayed up late after Jamie went to bed, filled new notebooks with notes about what he was learning and where his ideas might actually fit. Dr. Chen assigned him to work directly with Patricia on the integration layer, which meant long hours debugging why different system components failed to coordinate even when they could communicate. Patricia was patient in ways that saved his sanity, explaining architectural decisions and walking him through code with the care of someone who remembered what it was like to be new. "You're picking this up faster than I expected," she said on Friday afternoon, watching Ethan trace through a particularly complex coordination algorithm. "Most people take months to understand our system architecture. You've got the core concepts in a week." "I'm cheating," Ethan admitted. "I'm taking everything home and studying it like my life depends on it." "Doesn't it? Victoria doesn't hire people at this level on whims. Whatever she saw in you, she's betting the project on it." The weight of that expectation sat heavy on Ethan's chest. What happens if we fail? If we can't get this working by February? Patricia was quiet for a moment, her eyes on the screens showing years of work that might amount to nothing. The company doesn't collapse or anything dramatic, but this project was Sarah's vision. She convinced Victoria to invest in it, promised it would revolutionize how Hale Industries approached building management. If it fails, Sarah's credibility takes a hit. Some of the team will probably leave. Raj has offers from Google. James could work anywhere he wants. And Victoria, she trailed off. What about Victoria? She's been fighting the board for years about innovation versus short-term profits. They wanted her to focus on the core business, to stop throwing money at research projects. She insisted this was the future. If she's wrong, it strengthens the people who want to push her toward conservative decisions. It limits her ability to take risks on the next big idea. Ethan thought about Victoria in that bar, drunk and alone, saying nobody gave a damn. Thought about her offering him a chance when no one else would have looked twice at a security guard with 8-year-old credentials. Thought about how much she'd risked on someone who might fail her. "Then we don't fail," he said quietly. Patricia smiled. "I like your optimism. Let's see if we can turn it into results." By the end of the second week, Ethan had identified what he believed were the core problems. The system's subsystems were designed to optimize their individual domains, HVAC for temperature control, lighting for energy efficiency, security for access management, but they didn't share a unified understanding of the building's state. When the HVAC system predicted increased occupancy and started cooling, the lighting system didn't know to prepare for additional load. When security systems detected after-hours access, the energy systems didn't adjust their baseline assumptions. He presented his analysis to the team on a Friday afternoon using one of the glass-walled conference rooms, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard that showed information flow and decision-making architecture. "The problem isn't the predictions themselves," he explained, marker squeaking against the board. "It's that each subsystem is optimizing locally without global coordination. You need a meta layer that understands the building as a single entity and coordinates subsystem responses based on holistic state assessment." James, who'd been increasingly hostile as Ethan's competence became undeniable, leaned back in his chair with crossed arms. "We tried unified coordination in year one. It created computational bottlenecks that slowed response times to unusable levels." "Because you were trying to centralize decision-making," Ethan countered. "What I'm proposing is distributed intelligence with synchronized state awareness. Each subsystem maintains its own decision-making capability, but operates from a shared understanding of current and predicted building state. No bottleneck, but also no isolation." Dr. Chen, who'd been listening silently, sat forward. "Show me the architecture." Ethan pulled up his laptop, displaying diagrams he'd been refining for 2 weeks. The design showed a hub-and-spoke model where subsystems maintained autonomy but continuously synchronized their state models and predictions through a lightweight coordination protocol. Raj studied the diagrams with increasing interest. The synchronization overhead would be minimal if we're just sharing state vectors rather than raw data. And if predictions are coordinated, we could eliminate a lot of the redundant computation we're currently doing. Exactly, Ethan said. Each subsystem already generates predictions for its domain. Instead of keeping them isolated, we share them through the coordination layer so every subsystem can factor global conditions into its local decisions. Patricia was nodding slowly. It's elegant, but building it would require refactoring significant portions of our existing code base. Refactoring we've been avoiding because we didn't have a clear alternative architecture, Dr. Chen said. Her eyes were bright now, the exhaustion temporarily replaced by the spark of someone seeing a path forward. But if this works, if we can actually get distributed coordination with synchronized state, it solves the integration problem we've been stuck on for 18 months. If it works, James emphasized, this is still theory. We'd need to build a prototype, test it under realistic conditions, validate that the coordination overhead doesn't create new problems while solving old ones. So we build a prototype, Dr. Chen said decisively. Ethan, how long would it take you to implement a basic version of this coordination layer? Ethan calculated mentally. The learning curve on the development tools, the complexity of integrating with existing systems, the testing required to ensure he wasn't breaking anything. 3 weeks for a rough implementation, another 2 to integrate it with existing subsystems and work out the bugs. 5 weeks gets us to mid-January, Raj said. That leaves 6 weeks for testing and refinement before the February deadline. It's tight, but doable. Dr. Chen looked around the table, reading her team. Objections? James wanted to object. Ethan could see it in the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders. But even he couldn't deny the logic of the approach or the potential it represented. No objections, James said finally. But if this fails, we've burned 5 weeks we could have spent on alternatives. If this fails, we'll pivot, Dr. Chen said. But I don't think it will. Ethan, you're greenlit. Build the prototype. Patricia, you support him. Make sure he doesn't accidentally break our existing systems. Raj, start thinking about how to optimize the machine learning components once we have coordinated state awareness. James, document our current architecture so we have a clear baseline for comparison. She stood, and the meeting was over. As people filed out, Dr. Chen caught Ethan's arm. Don't make me regret this, she said quietly. The team's starting to believe in you. That's a rare thing and a fragile thing. If you fail now, it won't just be your credibility that suffers. I know, Ethan said. I'll make it work. See that you do. That weekend, Ethan explained to Jamie why he'd be working longer hours for the next few weeks. His son, with the understanding that sometimes surprised and humbled him, just nodded seriously. You have to finish your project, Jamie said. Like when I have a big test at school. Sometimes you have to work extra hard. Exactly like that. Will you still come to my soccer game next Saturday? Ethan thought about deadlines and pressure and the weight of expectations. Thought about what Victoria had said about flexibility, about Jamie always coming first. I'll be there, he promised. Front row. Wouldn't miss it. And he meant it. Because no matter how much was riding on this project, no matter how many people were counting on him, Jamie was still the person who mattered most. Everything else was just work. This was life. The next 3 weeks blurred together in a haze of code and caffeine and late nights that felt nothing like the exhaustion of his old life. This was different. The tiredness of creation rather than survival, of building something that mattered rather than just enduring until the next shift. Ethan would arrive at the office by 7:30, work through lunch hunched over his monitors, and often look up to find the sky dark outside, and the engineering floor mostly empty except for Patricia's desk lamp still glowing 2 rows over. She'd become his anchor in those weeks, the person who kept him from drowning in the complexity of systems he was still learning. When he'd stare at a section of code for an hour, unable to understand why the coordination protocol was failing, Patricia would roll her chair over and point out something obvious he'd missed. A timing issue, a data type mismatch, a logical assumption that didn't hold under edge conditions. You're thinking about this too abstractly, she said one evening when Ethan was ready to put his fist through his monitor. It was nearly 8 p.m., and they were the last ones left on the floor. Step back. What is this system actually trying to do? Coordinate subsystem state predictions so they can make globally optimized local decisions, Ethan recited, the definition he'd been living inside for weeks. No, simpler. What's the core function? Ethan rubbed his eyes, trying to see past his own exhaustion. Make the building smarter about energy usage. Right. And what does smarter mean in practice? Anticipating needs before they become problems, adjusting proactively instead of reactively. So your coordination layer needs to enable anticipation, not just communication. The subsystems don't just need to know what each other is doing, they need to know what each other is planning to do and why. Patricia pulled up a section of his code. Here, this handshake protocol you built? It's sharing current state beautifully, but it's not sharing predictive intent. The HVAC system knows the lighting system just turned on, but it doesn't know the lighting system is preparing for occupancy prediction in conference room 4B. That intent matters. The insight hit Ethan like cold water. I'm coordinating states, but not strategies. Exactly. And strategies are where the real optimization happens. He started coding immediately, fingers flying across the keyboard, rewriting the protocol to include predictive intent vectors alongside state data. Patricia watched for a few minutes, then smiled and returned to her own desk. You're going to get this, she called over. Just stop fighting yourself and trust your instincts. By midnight, Ethan had a working implementation. The coordination layer now shared not just what subsystems were currently doing, but what they were planning to do based on their predictive models. The HVAC system could see that lighting was preparing for occupancy and pre-cool accordingly. Security could see that HVAC was anticipating weekend mode and adjust access parameters. The building's intelligence was no longer isolated pockets of optimization. It was becoming genuinely unified. He ran the first integrated test at 12:30 a.m., watching data flow through the system, subsystems synchronizing their understanding of building state and coordinating their responses. For 5 minutes, everything worked perfectly. Then the whole thing crashed. Ethan stared at the error logs, trying to parse what had gone wrong. The crash had originated in the machine learning prediction engine, Raj's domain. Something about the coordinated state data was overwhelming the prediction algorithms, creating a cascade failure that took down the entire system. He was still debugging when Raj arrived at 7 the next morning, coffee in one hand and tablet in the other. The younger man stopped short when he saw Ethan still at his desk, surrounded by empty coffee cups and printouts of error logs. Did you sleep here? Raj asked. No, I went home at 2, got back at 5. Ethan gestured at his screens. I got the coordination layer working, but it's crashing your prediction engine. I think the synchronized state vectors are creating too much data for the machine learning models to process in real time. Raj set down his coffee and leaned over Ethan's shoulder, reading through the logs with the speed of someone who'd spent years inside these systems. You're feeding raw state vectors directly into the prediction pipeline. That's like trying to drink from a fire hose. The models need aggregated features, not raw data. I don't know how to aggregate them without losing the coordination benefits. You don't. I do. Raj pulled up a chair, his fingers already moving across his own keyboard. This is actually brilliant, by the way. You've created a data richness problem, which is infinitely better than a data poverty problem. Give me a few hours to build an aggregation layer and we'll have something extraordinary. Dr. Chen arrived an hour later to find Ethan and Raj deep in collaborative work, rebuilding the data pipeline to transform synchronized state vectors into features the machine learning models could consume. She stood watching for a moment, her expression unreadable, before disappearing into her office. By noon, they had it working. The coordination layer shared predictive intent, the aggregation layer transformed it into usable features, and the machine learning models consumed it to generate better predictions. The building system ran a simulated day in under 3 minutes, optimizing energy usage with a sophistication that made Ethan's chest tight with something that felt dangerously like hope. Run it again, Raj said, his voice tense with excitement. Different scenario. High occupancy, variable weather, multiple conflicting demands. Ethan loaded a stress test scenario the team had developed months ago, one that had broken every previous integration attempt. The system processed it smoothly, subsystems coordinating their responses, predictions updating in real time as simulated conditions changed. No crashes, no failures. Just clean, elegant coordination that would have seemed magical if Ethan didn't understand exactly how it worked. Oh my God, Raj breathed. Oh my God, it's actually working. Dr. Chen must have been monitoring from her office because she appeared immediately, Patricia and James trailing behind her. They crowded around Ethan's desk, watching the simulation results scroll across his screens. Is this real? Dr. Chen asked, her voice carefully controlled. Or are we looking at optimistic data? It's real, Raj confirmed. The simulation is using our standard stress test parameters. The coordination layer is doing exactly what Ethan predicted, enabling distributed optimization with synchronized state awareness. And the prediction models are responding beautifully to the aggregated feature data. James studied the results with the intensity of someone looking for flaws. Energy efficiency improvement over baseline? 18%, Ethan said quietly. With potential for more once we optimize the individual subsystem responses to take fuller advantage of coordinated predictions. The number hung in the air. Victoria had promised the board that a working system would deliver at least 15% efficiency improvement. Ethan had just exceeded that target in a simulation. This is a simulation, James said, but his voice lacked conviction. Real-world performance could be completely different. Then we test it in the real world, Dr. Chen said decisively. We have 6 weeks until the board deadline. That's enough time to deploy this to a test building and gather actual performance data. Patricia, which facilities could we use? The Riverside office complex, Patricia suggested. It's a Hale property. It has our standard building management systems already installed, and it's empty enough that we can control for occupancy variables. Set it up. I want the coordination layer deployed by Monday. Real-world testing starts next week. Dr. Chen turned to Ethan, and for the first time since he'd met her, she looked genuinely pleased. Good work. Don't let it go to your head, but this is the first real progress we've made in months. Keep it up. She walked away, and the team dispersed, but Ethan sat at his desk feeling something he hadn't allowed himself in weeks. Not just hope, but the quiet certainty that came from seeing theory become reality, from proving that 8 years hadn't erased what he knew how to do. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I'm hearing encouraging things. Keep doing what you're doing. He smiled and typed back. Just getting started. That Saturday, Ethan kept his promise to Jamie. He left work at noon, drove to the soccer fields on the north side, and found his son's team warming up under gray November skies. Jamie spotted him immediately and ran over, his face splitting into a grin that made every late night and difficult decision worth it. Dad, you came! I didn't think you'd make it. I promised, didn't I? Wouldn't miss this for anything. The game was chaotic in the way that youth soccer always was. 8-year-olds chasing the ball in enthusiastic clusters, occasionally remembering positions and strategy, more often just running with pure joy. Jamie played defense, and while he wasn't the most skilled player on the field, he played with a determination that reminded Ethan of himself. Every time an opponent approached, Jamie threw himself into the challenge, winning some and losing others, but never backing down. During halftime, one of the other fathers approached Ethan. You're Jamie's dad, right? Steve Martinez, my daughter's on the team. Ethan Cole, nice to meet you. Jamie talks about you all the time, says you're an engineer now, working on something important. Trying to be, Ethan said. It's new, still figuring it out. Well, whatever you're doing, it's made a difference to him. He used to be quieter, kept to himself. Last few weeks, he's been more confident. Kids pick up on that stuff, you know? When their parents are happy, they feel more secure. The observation hit Ethan unexpectedly. He'd been so focused on the work, on proving himself, on not failing everyone who was counting on him, that he hadn't noticed the changes in Jamie. But looking at his son now, laughing with teammates, fully present in the moment, Ethan could see it. His son looked lighter, somehow, less burdened by worries an 8-year-old shouldn't have to carry. Jamie's team won 3-2 on a goal scored in the final minutes. Afterward, Ethan took his son for burgers at the diner they used to frequent before money got so tight that eating out became impossible. Jamie ordered a chocolate milkshake and talked nonstop about the game, about school, about a science project on renewable energy he wanted to do. Can you help me with it? Jamie asked. I want to build a model showing how solar panels work, but I don't really understand the science part. Of course I'll help you. We can work on it together. Like a team. Exactly like a team. Jamie beamed and returned his attention to his burger. Ethan watched him eat and thought about Patricia's words from weeks ago. How Victoria was betting the project on him, but she wasn't the only one. Jamie was betting his whole world on the hope that his father could actually change their lives, could be more than just tired and worried and always working. That bet felt heavier than any professional obligation and more motivating than any deadline. Monday morning arrived with the weight of transition. The team gathered in the engineering lab at 7 a.m. earlier than usual to begin the deployment to Riverside Office Complex. The building was 20 stories, recently renovated, and currently operating at about 30% occupancy, while Hale Industries moved departments in gradually. "It's perfect for our purposes," Patricia explained, pulling up building schematics on the main display. "We have enough real occupancy to generate meaningful data, but not so much that a system failure would be catastrophic. And the building management systems are modern enough to interface cleanly with our coordination layer." Dr. Chen assigned roles with military precision. Raj would handle the machine learning deployment and monitoring. Patricia would oversee the integration with existing building systems. James would manage the data collection and analysis infrastructure, and Ethan would be responsible for the coordination layer itself, making sure it functioned correctly, debugging issues as they arose, and optimizing performance based on real-world conditions. "This is not a simulation anymore," Dr. Chen said, her voice carrying the weight of 3 years of work. "This is the real thing. If it fails, we'll know immediately. If it succeeds, we'll have the data we need to convince the board. Either way, by the end of this week, we'll know whether this project lives or dies." The deployment took 3 days. 3 days of driving between Hale headquarters and Riverside Complex, of crawling through server rooms and mechanical spaces, of installing sensors and configuring communication protocols, of testing and retesting every connection until the entire system was live and integrated. Thursday morning at 9 a.m., Dr. Chen gave the order. "Activate the coordination layer. Let's see what happens." Ethan pressed enter, and the system came alive. On the monitors in front of him, he could see data flowing, subsystems sharing state information, coordinating predictions, adjusting their behavior based on unified building intelligence. The HVAC system anticipated occupancy patterns and preconditioned spaces. The lighting system coordinated with security to optimize energy usage in low-traffic areas. The entire building began operating not as isolated systems, but as a single, intelligent organism. For 2 hours, the team watched in silence, looking for failures, for crashes, for any sign that the real world would break what simulations had validated. But the system held. More than held. It performed beautifully, optimization metrics climbing steadily as the coordination layer learned the building's actual patterns and refined its predictive models. At 11 a.m., Raj started laughing, just quiet laughter at first, then building into something that sounded almost hysterical. "The efficiency improvement," he said, pointing at his screen. "Look at the efficiency improvement." Ethan looked. 22%. The real-world system was outperforming the simulation by 4 full percentage points. "That's not possible," James said, but he was already pulling up the raw data, validating the numbers, trying to find the error that would explain results too good to be true. There was no error. The system was simply working better than any of them had dared to hope. "Doctor." Chen stood very still, her eyes on the monitors, her expression carefully neutral. Then she turned to her team and said 2 words that changed everything. "We won." The celebration was subdued. Engineers weren't given to dramatic displays, but Ethan could feel the shift in the room. The exhaustion that had permeated the team for months was replaced by something electric, the knowledge that years of work had finally crystallized into success. Patricia hugged him, which surprised them both. Raj shook his hand with genuine warmth. Even James approached, his expression still skeptical but grudgingly respectful. "You did good work," James said stiffly. "The coordination layer is solid. I was wrong to doubt it." "You were right to doubt it," Ethan replied. "Skepticism keeps us honest, makes us prove our ideas instead of just assuming they're right." Dr. Chen approached last after the others had dispersed. "Victoria wants to see you. She's in her office." Ethan found Victoria standing at her window, looking out over the city, her posture radiating controlled satisfaction. She turned when he entered, and her smile was genuine. "Dr. Chen just called me. 22% efficiency improvement. Real-world performance exceeding simulation results. Do you understand what this means? We met the deadline? We exceeded it. We proved the concept works. We gave the board exactly what I promised them, with weeks to spare. She crossed to her desk, pulling out a bottle of champagne that had clearly been waiting for this moment. But more than that, you proved something I suspected but couldn't confirm until now. What's that? The talent doesn't disappear. It just waits. You spent 8 years in survival mode, using maybe 10% of your actual capability, and the moment you had the opportunity, you exceeded what people working full-time for 3 years couldn't accomplish. She poured 2 glasses, handing him one. That's not luck. That's not charity. That's excellence that was always there, just waiting for someone to recognize it. They touched glasses, and Ethan took a sip of champagne that probably cost more than his old monthly rent. What happens now? Now we prepare for the board presentation. 2 weeks from today, you and Dr. Chen will present the results to the full board of directors. They'll ask hard questions, they'll look for weaknesses, and they'll ultimately decide whether to fund full-scale deployment across all Hale properties. Me? I'm presenting to the board? You're the senior engineer who built the system. Of course you're presenting. Victoria's expression turned serious. Ethan, this success isn't just about the technology. It's about proving that innovation matters, that investing in long-term solutions pays off, that building excellent teams and giving them resources produces results. The board has been pushing me toward conservative decisions for years. This is my proof that they're wrong. The weight of that, of being evidence in a larger argument about the company's direction, settled on Ethan's shoulders like a physical thing. What if I mess it up? What if I can't explain the technical details in ways they understand? Then we'll practice. Every day between now and the presentation, we'll run through it until you could do it in your sleep. Dr. Chen will handle the high-level strategic vision. You'll handle the technical proof that it works. Together, you'll be unbeatable. Ethan wanted to believe her, wanted to trust that success in the engineering lab would translate to success in the boardroom, but he'd learned over 8 years that nothing was guaranteed, that victories could evaporate the moment circumstances changed. I'll do my best, he said simply. I know you will. That's why you're here. The next 2 weeks became a different kind of challenge. Instead of code and algorithms, Ethan wrestled with presentations and talking points, with translating technical complexity into business value, with learning to speak the language of return on investment and competitive advantage. Dr. Chen coached him through it with surprising patience, running him through mock presentations and critique sessions that left him exhausted in entirely new ways. Stop using technical jargon, she said after one particularly disastrous practice run. The board members aren't engineers. They're business people. They care about outcomes, not methodologies. When you say distributed coordination with synchronized state awareness, their eyes glaze over. When you say the system makes buildings 22% more efficient, saving millions in energy costs, they lean forward. But the technical details matter. They need to understand how it works to trust that it's real. They need to understand enough to trust the team that built it, not enough to rebuild it themselves. She pulled up his presentation slides. Here, this slide showing your coordination protocol architecture? Cut it. This slide with the machine learning feature aggregation pipeline? Cut it. This slide showing the actual energy savings across different building types and occupancy patterns? Keep it, expand it, make it the centerpiece. Ethan resisted initially, but as they refined the presentation, he began to understand. The board didn't need to understand the engineering. They needed to understand the impact. They needed to see clear evidence that the investment had paid off, that the risk Victoria had taken was justified, that scaling this system across the company's properties would generate returns that made the initial $40 million investment look prudent. The night before the presentation, Ethan couldn't sleep. He lay in his small bedroom, staring at the ceiling, running through the slides in his mind, anticipating questions and preparing answers. At 2 a.m., he gave up and went to the kitchen, making tea because coffee would only make the anxiety worse. He found Jamie sitting at the table, wrapped in a blanket, working on his renewable energy science project. Buddy, what are you doing up? I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about my presentation. Jamie had to present his project to his class the next day. What if I forget what to say? What if they don't think it's good? Ethan sat down beside his son, seeing his own anxiety reflected in 8-year-old features. You know what I do when I'm nervous about presentations? What? I remind myself that I know my work, that I built something real, and the presentation is just helping other people understand what I already know is true. You built a great project, Jamie. You understand how solar panels work. The presentation is just sharing that understanding. If you forget some words, that's okay. The knowledge is still there. Jamie considered this seriously. Are you nervous about your presentation tomorrow? Terrified. But you know your work is good, right? You told me the system works better than anyone expected. It does. Then it'll be okay. Jamie said it with the absolute certainty of childhood, like worry itself was optional. You just have to help them understand what you already know. Ethan pulled his son into a hug, grateful for the wisdom that came from 8 years of life uncluttered by cynicism or self-doubt. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart. You're just tired too much to notice. They sat together for another hour, working on their respective presentations, father and son both preparing to prove that what they'd built mattered. Eventually, Jamie's eyes began to droop, and Ethan carried him back to bed, tucking him in among his books and drawings and dreams of Mars. In the morning, Ethan dressed in the suit Victoria had insisted on buying him, charcoal gray, properly fitted, expensive enough that he felt like an imposter wearing it. He dropped Jamie at school with words of encouragement about the science project, then drove to Hale Industries with his heart hammering against his ribs. The boardroom was on the 41st floor, one level above the executive suite, a space designed to intimidate. The table was polished mahogany that probably cost more than a car. The chairs were leather that had never known the indignity of duct tape repairs. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered views that reminded everyone in the room of exactly how high the stakes were. 12 board members sat around that table, men and women in their 50s and 60s, wearing suits that screamed old money and established power. Victoria sat at the head, Dr. Chen to her right. The empty chair to her left was for Ethan. He took his seat, set down his laptop, and met Victoria's eyes. She gave him a small nod of encouragement. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man named Harrison, who Ethan remembered from Victoria's phone contacts the night he'd rescued her, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss the building automation project, Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Ms. Hale, you have the floor. Victoria stood, commanding the room with the same authority Ethan had seen that first night in her office. 3 years ago, I proposed that Hale Industries invest in next-generation building automation systems. The board approved a $40 million research budget with the expectation of a working system that could deliver at least 15% energy efficiency improvement across our properties. Today, I'm pleased to report that we've exceeded that target. She gestured to Dr. Chen, who stood and began her portion of the presentation. For 15 minutes, Dr. Chen walked the board through the technical journey, the challenges they'd faced, the breakthroughs they'd achieved, the validation process that had confirmed their results. She was polished, professional, and persuasive in ways that made Ethan grateful she was handling the strategic framing. Then it was his turn. Ethan stood, his hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system, and pulled up the first slide, a simple graph showing energy efficiency improvements across different building scenarios. The system we've developed doesn't just meet the 15% efficiency target, he said, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt. In real-world testing at our Riverside complex, we're seeing sustained performance of 22% efficiency improvement. That translates to approximately $14 million in annual energy savings across all Hale properties, with full return on investment in less than 3 years. He walked them through the results, through the data that proved the system worked, through the evidence that what had started as research had become something commercially viable. Questions came. Hard questions about scalability, about failure modes, about implementation costs and timelines. Ethan answered each one, drawing on weeks of preparation and years of engineering knowledge that had been waiting for exactly this moment. A woman named Patricia Thornton, no relation to his teammate, leaned forward, her expression skeptical. Mr. Cole, I understand you've been with the company for less than 2 months. How do we know this system will continue performing once you're no longer directly managing it? It was the question Ethan had been dreading, the one that cut straight to his greatest insecurity. He took a breath, thought about Jamie's words from the night before, and answered honestly. You're right to be concerned about key person dependency, which is why we've documented every aspect of the system architecture, why we've cross-trained the entire engineering team, and why the design itself is robust enough to function without constant expert intervention. But more fundamentally, the system works because the underlying principles are sound. The coordination layer enables optimization that wasn't possible before. That's not dependent on me. It's dependent on good engineering, which the team Dr. Chen has built is more than capable of maintaining and improving. Harrison, the chairman, studied Ethan with the intensity of someone evaluating an investment. Ms. Hale speaks very highly of you, Mr. Cole. She says you're the reason this project succeeded where it had been failing for years. Is that accurate? Ethan glanced at Dr. Chen, who gave him the slightest nod. I contributed fresh perspectives on a hard problem, but the real reason we succeeded is that Dr. Chen built an exceptional team, gave them the resources they needed, and created an environment where innovation could happen. I just added one piece to a puzzle they'd been working for 3 years. It was political and diplomatic and also completely true. The system worked because of collective effort, not individual heroics. His coordination layer mattered, but it only mattered because Raj had optimized the machine learning components, because Patricia had integrated it flawlessly with existing systems, because James had built the data infrastructure that proved it worked. The questions continued for another 30 minutes, about costs, about timelines, about competitive advantages, and intellectual property protection. Dr. Chen and Ethan tag-teamed the answers, and gradually, Ethan could see the skepticism in the room shifting toward cautious acceptance. Finally, Harrison called for a vote. All in favor of proceeding with full-scale deployment of the building automation system signify by saying aye. The ayes came unanimously, 12 voices affirming that the gamble had paid off, that innovation mattered, that Victoria's vision had been vindicated. Motion carries, Harrison said. Ms. Hale, proceed with implementation. Keep the board updated on progress. This meeting is adjourned. The room emptied quickly, board members with other meetings, other priorities, other companies to oversee. But Victoria remained, and Dr. Chen and Ethan, the three of them standing in the empty boardroom with the weight of victory settling around them. We did it, Dr. Chen said quietly. We actually did it. You did it, Victoria corrected. Both of you. This was your win, Sarah. 3 years of your leadership got us here. And 2 months of Ethan's brilliance got us across the finish line. Dr. Chen extended her hand to Ethan. Thank you for taking the risk, for trusting the team, for proving that sometimes the best people are the ones no one else was looking at. Ethan shook her hand, feeling the full weight of what they'd accomplished. Not just the technology, not just the business success, but the proof that second chances existed, that talent could survive years of dormancy, that walls built by circumstance could be torn down by people willing to see past them. That afternoon, Ethan left work at 3 p.m., the earliest he'd left since starting, and drove to Jamie's school. He waited outside the classroom until his son emerged, face flushed with excitement. Dad, you came. I thought you had your big meeting. I did. It went well. How was your presentation? I got an A+. Mrs. Peterson said my solar panel model was the best in the class. Jamie practically vibrated with pride. And I explained all the science parts without forgetting anything. That's my boy. I'm so proud of you. They went for ice cream, sat in the park, despite the November cold, and talked about their respective victories. And Ethan thought about how, 8 years ago, he'd been convinced that the best parts of his life were behind him, that survival was all he could hope for, that dreams were luxuries reserved for people who hadn't lost as much as he had. He'd been wrong. The best parts were just beginning, and this time he wasn't facing them alone. The weeks following the board approval moved with a momentum Ethan had never experienced in his professional life. What had been a research project confined to a single test building suddenly became a company-wide initiative with budgets, timelines, and expectations that would have terrified him months ago. But something had shifted in those months, not just in his circumstances, but in his understanding of what he was capable of when exhaustion wasn't his default state. Dr. Chen called a team meeting the Monday after the board presentation, gathering everyone in the main conference room with an energy that crackled like electricity before a storm. "We have 4 months to deploy the coordination system across 12 major hail properties," she announced, pulling up a project timeline that looked simultaneously ambitious and impossible. "That means we're scaling from 1 building to 12, training facility management teams, establishing monitoring protocols, and documenting everything well enough that this becomes standard operating procedure rather than experimental technology." James, who'd grown considerably less hostile over the past month, leaned forward with a frown. 4 months for 12 buildings? That's aggressive. We're going to need more people. "We're getting them. Victoria approved budget for 6 additional engineers, 3 implementation specialists, and 2 technical writers. Ethan, you'll lead the coordination layer deployment team. Raj, you handle machine learning optimization. Patricia, integration and quality assurance. James, you're managing the data infrastructure scaling." The meeting continued for 2 hours, breaking down an overwhelming project into manageable pieces, assigning responsibilities, establishing checkpoints. By the time it ended, Ethan had a team of 4 engineers reporting to him, people he'd be responsible for managing, mentoring, and ensuring succeeded. The prospect should have been daunting, but instead it felt like validation, like proof that his success wasn't accidental, but repeatable. His new team arrived over the next 2 weeks. 2 recent graduates from Carnegie Mellon, 1 experienced engineer from a competitor who'd heard about Hale's building automation breakthrough, and 1 internal transfer who'd been working in a different division but wanted to be part of something innovative. Ethan found himself doing for them what Patricia had done for him, translating complex systems into understandable concepts, creating space for questions, building confidence through patient explanation rather than intimidation. "You're good at this," Patricia observed one afternoon, watching Ethan walk one of the new engineers through a particularly tricky section of the coordination protocol. "Management, I mean. You make people feel safe asking questions." "I remember what it felt like to be the person who didn't know," Ethan said simply. Seemed like the best approach was to not make others feel that way. The first deployment beyond Riverside happened in early January at the Westfield Tower, a 30-story office building in downtown Seattle that housed several major Hale clients. The installation took a week, longer than they'd hoped, shorter than they'd feared, and when they activated the system, Ethan held his breath waiting for the inevitable crisis that would prove their success had been a fluke. The crisis never came. The system activated smoothly, subsystems coordinating exactly as designed, efficiency metrics climbing to 21% improvement within the first 48 hours. By the end of week 1, they were at 23%, exceeding even the Riverside results. "It's learning faster," Raj explained, studying the machine learning model performance. "Each building we deployed gives the algorithms more training data. The system is getting smarter with every installation." By February, they'd deployed to 6 buildings. By March, all 12 target properties were online, and the aggregate energy savings were exceeding projections so dramatically that the finance team had to revise their return on investment calculations. What had been positioned as a 3-year payback was now tracking closer to 2 years, which meant Victoria could go back to the board and request budget for additional innovation projects backed by evidence that her approach delivered results. But the real change wasn't in the spreadsheets or the deployment schedules, it was in the people. Ethan watched his team grow from hesitant newcomers into confident engineers who could troubleshoot deployment issues independently, who contributed innovations that improved the original design, who took ownership of the project in ways that meant its success no longer depended on him. He watched Dr. Chen's perpetual exhaustion fade, replaced by the energized focus of someone who'd proven their vision was right. He watched even James soften, becoming not friendly exactly, but collaborative, willing to acknowledge good ideas regardless of their source. And he watched Victoria transform from the broken woman he'd found in that bar into someone who moved through the company with renewed authority, who spoke at industry conferences about the future of building automation, who used their success as a platform to push for more innovation, more risk-taking, more investment in the kind of long-term thinking that created real value rather than quarterly earnings bumps. One evening in late March, Victoria called Ethan to her office. It was nearly 7 p.m., and the executive suite was mostly empty, but her light was still on. It always seemed to be on, like she lived more at work than anywhere else. Sit, she said when he arrived. We need to talk about your future. The words triggered a flash of panic that Ethan immediately recognized as irrational. This wasn't a termination conversation. Victoria's expression was thoughtful, not regretful. The building automation project is transitioning from development to operations, she continued, which means the intense phase of your work is ending. You could stay on the team, continue optimizing and improving the system. That's a perfectly good career path. But, Ethan heard the unspoken qualifier, but I think you're capable of more. The board was impressed by the presentation, but more than that, they were impressed by the results. They're asking what other innovation projects we have in development, which got me thinking about all those other notebooks you have, the ones that weren't about building automation. Ethan thought about the notebooks still stacked on his kitchen table at home, ideas about renewable energy integration, about smart grid coordination, about problems that had interested him during those years when interest was all he could afford. You want me to start another project? I want you to lead a new division, Advanced Systems Research. Your job would be to identify high-potential problems, build teams to solve them, and translate innovative ideas into commercial reality. You'd have budget, autonomy, and the expectation that not everything you try will succeed, but that what does succeed will be transformative. The offer hung in the air between them, enormous in its implications. Not just a job, but the kind of role people spent entire careers building toward. The kind of position that meant Ethan wouldn't just be an engineer, but a leader, someone who shaped the company's direction rather than just executing someone else's vision. Why me? He asked. There are people with more experience, with proven track records of leadership. Because you understand something most successful people forget, what it's like to have talent but no opportunity. That perspective matters. It'll make you look for potential in places others won't, give chances to people others overlook. Victoria's expression softened. That night in the bar, when you helped me, you didn't know who I was. You just saw someone who needed help and decided that mattered more than convenience. That same instinct will make you a better leader than someone who only values credentials and pedigree. Ethan thought about his team, about how he'd built it, not by hiring the most impressive resumes, but by looking for curiosity and determination and the willingness to learn. Thought about how that approach had created a group that actually wanted to work together rather than just coexist professionally. I'd need time to think about it, he said. Need to talk to Jamie, make sure he's okay with his dad taking on something this big. Of course, take a week, but Ethan, don't let fear make you choose safety over growth. You've already proven you can do this. Now the question is whether you're willing to. That night, over dinner at their new apartment, a 2-bedroom place with heat that actually worked and windows that didn't leak cold air, Ethan explained the offer to Jamie. His son listened with the serious attention he gave to things that mattered, occasionally asking questions that cut straight to the heart of the issue. Would you be gone more? Jamie asked. Like, would you miss my games and stuff? I'd have more control over my schedule, actually. I'd be setting the priorities instead of responding to someone else's timeline. Would you be happy? The question was simple and devastating. I think so. Yeah, I'd be doing work that matters, building things that could help people. Jamie considered this while systematically arranging his peas into a geometric pattern on his plate. Mrs. Chen says happy parents make better parents, and you've been a lot happier since you started being an engineer again. Mrs. Chen is wise. So you should do it. Take the job. Build cool stuff. Just don't forget that I exist. Never, Ethan promised. You're the reason any of this matters. Every decision I make, I'm asking myself if it's good for you. If this job meant I'd miss your childhood, I'd turn it down. But I think it means I get to be more present, not less. Then it's decided. Jamie pronounced this with the finality of someone who'd solved a complex equation. You're going to be the boss of making new inventions. That's so cool, Dad. Wait until I tell my class. Ethan accepted the position the following Monday. Within 2 weeks, he had office space on the 39th floor, budget approval for his first 2 research initiatives, and the authority to hire a team of 8 engineers and researchers. He chose carefully, not the people with the most impressive credentials, but the ones who showed curiosity, who asked good questions, who seemed hungry for the chance to prove what they could do. One of his first hires was a woman named Lisa Chen, no relation to Dr. Sarah Chen, who'd been working as a night custodian at Hale Industries while finishing her electrical engineering degree online. She'd sent Ethan an email after hearing about the Advanced Systems Research Division, attaching a proposal for improving solar panel efficiency that was rough and unpolished but demonstrated genuine insight. "Why were you working as a custodian?" Ethan asked during her interview. "Same reason anyone works night shifts in jobs they're overqualified for," Lisa said bluntly. "I had bills, I had student loans, and I had a daughter to support. Day jobs in engineering required experience I didn't have, so I took what I could get and kept studying." Ethan heard echoes of his own story in her words, the survival mode, the hidden potential, the talent waiting for someone to recognize it. "You're hired. Start Monday. And Lisa, your experience matters more than you think. Understanding what it's like to work every job in a building makes you better at designing systems for that building." She stared at him like he'd handed her something she'd stopped believing existed. "You're serious?" "Completely. Welcome to the team." By May, Advanced Systems Research had 3 active projects: improvements to the building automation system, a smart grid integration initiative, and preliminary work on renewable energy storage solutions. The team worked with the intensity of people who'd been given a chance they didn't want to waste, and Ethan found that leading them felt nothing like he'd feared. Management wasn't about having all the answers. It was about creating space for smart people to find answers together. June brought an unexpected development. Dr. Sarah Chen stopped by Ethan's office one afternoon, her expression unusually hesitant. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. "Of course. What's up?" She sat down, and for a moment, the formidable engineer who'd terrified Ethan during his first team meeting looked almost uncertain. "I wanted to thank you, properly, not just for the building automation project, but for how you approached it. I'm not sure I understand. When you joined the team, you could have come in acting like you were there to save us, could have treated our 3 years of work like it didn't matter because you had better ideas. A lot of people would have, especially with Victoria's backing." Dr. Chen's voice softened. "But you didn't. You respected what we'd built, acknowledged our expertise, and integrated your innovations with our foundation. That humility made the project succeed when arrogance would have torn the team apart." Ethan thought about those early days, about how terrified he'd been, about how desperation for success had forced him to be collaborative because he'd known he couldn't succeed alone. "I didn't have a choice. I needed you all more than you needed me. Maybe initially, but you maintained that approach even after you proved yourself. Even after the board presentation, even after Victoria promoted you, you kept treating people like their contributions mattered. That's rare. And it's why people want to work with you now." She stood, extending her hand. "So thank you for showing that leadership can be about lifting people up instead of standing on their shoulders." After she left, Ethan sat at his desk with actual space and actual windows showing the city below, and thought about the journey from that night outside Murphy's bar to this moment. 8 months. That's all it had been. 8 months since he'd intervened to help a stranger, since he'd made a decision based on principle rather than convenience, since he'd opened a door he hadn't known existed. 8 months, and his entire world had transformed. That weekend, Ethan took Jamie to the Hale Industries building on a Saturday when it was mostly empty. They rode the elevator to the 40th floor, and Ethan showed his son the executive suite, the engineering labs, the conference room where he'd presented to the board. "This is where you work?" Jamie asked, his eyes wide as he took in the space. "This is so fancy, Dad." "This is where I work. Want to see my actual office?" On the 39th floor, Ethan unlocked his office door and watched Jamie explore the space with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a new planet. His son examined the whiteboards covered in equations, studied the prototype devices on the workbench, pressed his face against the windows to look at the city below. "You can see our apartment from here," Jamie said, pointing. "Well, almost. We're behind that building, but close." "We won't be for much longer," Ethan said. "I found a house. 3 bedrooms, backyard, good school district. We can move in August if you want." Jamie turned from the window, his expression cycling through excitement and concern. "A house? Like a real house? Can we afford that?" The question broke Ethan's heart a little. The fact that his 8-year-old son had learned to worry about money had absorbed the anxiety of their years in survival mode. "We can afford it, comfortably. You don't have to worry about that anymore, buddy. We're stable now. Because you're an engineer again. Because I got a second chance. Because someone saw potential when they could have just seen a security guard. Because I worked really hard, and it paid off." Jamie processed this with his characteristic seriousness. "The lady from the bar, Ms. Hale, she's the one who gave you the chance, right?" "She is." "Then we should thank her, like really thank her, because she changed our whole life." The idea had been forming in Ethan's mind for weeks, but hearing it from Jamie crystallized it into something concrete. "You're right. We should." The following Monday, Ethan approached Victoria with a proposal that had nothing to do with engineering and everything to do with principle. "I want to start a program," he said, standing in her office with a folder full of notes he'd been compiling. "Talent Recognition Initiative. We'd partner with community colleges and workforce development programs, identify people with potential who are working survival jobs, give them opportunities to prove what they can do." Victoria listened as he outlined the concept: paid internships that could convert to full positions, mentorship programs pairing experienced engineers with promising candidates, scholarship funds for people completing degrees while working. It would cost money, require infrastructure, demand commitment from senior staff willing to invest time in people who might not work out. "You're describing what I did for you," Victoria said when he finished, "systematizing it instead of making it dependent on chance encounters." "Exactly. I got lucky. Right person, right place, right time. But how many other people with similar potential are still walking hallways at night, or driving ride shares, or stocking shelves, never getting the chance to show what they could do? This program wouldn't fix everything, but it could fix some things for some people." Victoria smiled, and it was the genuine smile Ethan had learned to recognize, the one that meant she was actually pleased rather than just being professionally cordial. "How much budget are you requesting?" $500,000 to start. Scale up if it proves successful." "You have it. Draft a formal proposal, get HR involved on the logistics, and launch it by September. And Ethan? Name it whatever you want, but make sure people know this came from you. This kind of initiative matters. Others should know who championed it." By August, the talent recognition program was taking shape. Lisa Chen had volunteered to help coordinate it alongside her engineering work, and together they'd identified 15 candidates for the first cohort: custodians with engineering aptitude, security guards studying computer science, administrative assistants with hidden technical skills. People whose potential had been invisible because no one had thought to look. The same month, Ethan and Jamie moved into their new house, a modest 3-bedroom in a neighborhood with good schools and a park within walking distance. Mrs. Chen had cried when they told her, had insisted on helping them move even though Ethan had hired professionals, had made them promise to visit often because Jamie was like a grandson to her, and she couldn't imagine not seeing him regularly. "You made it," she said, standing in their new living room while Jamie showed her his bedroom. "You actually made it out." "We made it," Ethan corrected. "You were part of that. All those nights you watched Jamie when I couldn't afford to pay you what you deserved. All the times you looked the other way when rent was late. All the small kindnesses that kept us going when everything felt impossible. This success belongs to a lot of people, and you're one of them." She hugged him then, this small woman who'd been part of their survival, and Ethan felt the weight of gratitude for all the people who'd helped when help had mattered most. September arrived with the official launch of the Talent Recognition Program, a ceremony at Hale Industries where the first 15 participants were introduced to the company and paired with their mentors. Ethan gave a brief speech about potential and opportunity, about how talent didn't disappear but waited, about how sometimes the best people were the ones everyone else had stopped looking at. Victoria spoke too, and her words carried the authority of someone who'd built an empire and learned what actually mattered. This program represents a fundamental belief that worth isn't determined by credentials or pedigree, but by ability and determination and the willingness to work hard when given the chance. Ethan Cole proved that belief correct. These 15 people will prove it again, and next year we'll find 15 more, and the year after that, another 15, until recognizing potential becomes what we're known for, not just manufacturing buildings, but building people. In October, the building automation system won an Industry Innovation Award. Ethan attended the ceremony with Dr. Chen, and when they accepted the award together, she insisted he give the acceptance speech. This technology exists because a team of brilliant engineers worked for 3 years to solve an impossible problem, he said, holding the award but focusing on the message. It exists because a CEO believed innovation mattered more than short-term profits. And it exists because sometimes fresh perspectives can unlock solutions that were always there, just waiting for someone to see them differently. This award belongs to everyone who believed that hard problems were worth solving even when success seemed impossible. The applause was polite but genuine, and afterward, several competitors approached Ethan with job offers. More money, more prestige, more everything. He declined them all without hesitation because the work he was doing at Hale Industries wasn't about compensation. It was about building something that mattered, about creating opportunities for others the way Victoria had created one for him. By November, a full year after that night outside Murphy's bar, Ethan had settled into a life he'd stopped believing was possible. He worked reasonable hours on projects that challenged and excited him. He made it to every one of Jamie's soccer games, helped with homework, had dinner together most nights. He hired talented people and watched them flourish, saw the talent recognition program participants transform from uncertain beginners into confident contributors. And he maintained a friendship with Victoria that had evolved beyond professional obligation into genuine connection. They met for coffee every few weeks, discussing company strategy and life philosophy with equal comfort. Two people who'd seen each other at their worst and their best and knew the distance between those states was often just opportunity and timing. "Do you ever think about that night?" Victoria asked during one of their coffee meetings. They were in a cafe near the office, rain pattering against the windows in the way that made Seattle feel like home. The bar, the intervention, everything that followed? All the time, Ethan admitted. Sometimes I can't believe it was real, that a random act of decency could change everything. It wasn't random, it was character. Most people would have walked past. Victoria stirred her coffee absently. I was in a dark place that night, convinced I'd built an empire but lost everything that mattered. Convinced success and loneliness were inseparable. Then a stranger proved kindness still existed, that people could care without wanting something in return. That night didn't just give me help, it gave me hope. You gave me more, Ethan said quietly. You gave me my life back, gave Jamie a future that isn't defined by survival and worry, gave me proof that talent matters, that second chances exist, that walls can be torn down. We gave each other what we needed. I think that's what the best professional relationships are. Mutual recognition of value, mutual investment in success. She smiled. Though I have to admit, when I saw those notebooks in your apartment, I wasn't thinking about mutual anything. I was thinking I'd found the solution to a $40 million problem and hoping you wouldn't realize how desperate I was to hire you. Ethan laughed. I was too terrified to realize anything except that you were offering me more money than I'd made in years. Desperation recognizes desperation, I guess. Desperation and potential. The combination that changes everything. As November turned to December, Ethan found himself reflecting on transformation, not just his own, but the ripple effects that had spread from one night's decision. The building automation system was now deployed across 30 Hale properties, saving millions in energy costs and reducing the company's carbon footprint dramatically. The talent recognition program had identified its second cohort, 20 people this time, and 3 participants from the first cohort had already converted to full-time positions. Advanced Systems Research had 2 patents pending and 3 more projects in development that could reshape entire industries. But the changes that mattered most weren't measured in patents or profit margins. They were measured in Lisa Chen's growing confidence as an engineer, in the way Dr. Sarah Chen's team had expanded to include people from non-traditional backgrounds, in Jamie's excitement about science, and his belief that his father could accomplish anything. They were measured in the message Ethan had received from one of the talent recognition participants, a former custodian named Marcus, who'd written, "Thank you for seeing something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself." On Christmas Eve, Ethan hosted dinner at his house, the first real hosting he'd done since Sarah had died. Mrs. Chen came, of course, and Victoria, who'd admitted she had nowhere else to be and no one else to celebrate with. Dr. Sarah Chen stopped by with her husband and two teenagers. Patricia brought her wife and homemade pie. Even James appeared briefly, awkward but genuinely pleased to be included. They crowded around Ethan's dining table, not the expensive kind, just one he'd found at a furniture store that offered reasonable payment plans, and shared food and stories and laughter that had nothing to do with work and everything to do with connection. Jamie was in his element, showing Victoria his solar panel science project, explaining to Dr. Chen's teenagers about Mars colonization, charming Mrs. Chen into letting him have a second piece of pie. At one point, Ethan found himself in the kitchen with Victoria, both of them ostensibly getting more drinks, but really just taking a moment away from the warm chaos of the gathering. "This is nice," Victoria said, looking through the doorway at the people filling Ethan's home. Family. Not blood family necessarily, but the kind you build through shared experience. "You're part of it," Ethan said. "You know that, right? This whole life exists because you took a chance on someone you had no reason to trust." "I trusted my instincts. They said you were worth the risk." She turned to face him, her expression serious. "Can I tell you something? That night at the bar wasn't rock bottom for me. Rock bottom came 2 days later when I realized I'd been so drunk I couldn't remember how I got home. Couldn't remember who'd helped me. I had to check my phone records, piece together the evening from fragments. When I finally remembered it was you, the security guard from my building, I felt ashamed. Ashamed that I'd been that vulnerable. Ashamed that I'd needed rescuing. Ashamed that the person who helped me was someone I'd never noticed during all the times I'd walked past you." "Victoria, let me finish." That shame became motivation. I looked at my life and saw what I'd become. So focused on success that I'd forgotten about people. So isolated in my achievement that I'd convinced myself connection wasn't possible. You reminded me that kindness exists, that people matter more than profits, that the measure of character isn't what you accomplish but how you treat people when no one's watching. Everything I've done since that night, hiring you, supporting innovation, starting the talent recognition program, it's all been about being worthy of the help you gave me. Ethan felt emotion tighten his throat. You were always worthy. You just needed to remember that worth isn't earned through perfection. It exists because people have inherent value, regardless of their achievements or failures. You sound like you've thought about this a lot. I spent 8 years believing my worth was tied to how many jobs I could work, how little sleep I could survive on, how much I could sacrifice without breaking. It's taken me most of this year to understand that I mattered even when I was walking hallways at midnight, that my value wasn't contingent on professional success. He smiled. Though I have to admit, professional success makes remembering that a lot easier. They returned to the party, to the laughter and warmth, to Jamie's insistence that everyone play a board game he'd received for his birthday. Ethan watched his son interact with these people who'd become their extended family, saw the ease with which Jamie moved through the world, now that worry wasn't his constant companion, and felt gratitude so profound it was almost painful. This was what second chances looked like. Not dramatic transformations or overnight success, but the slow accumulation of better days, the gradual building of a life that felt worth living, the quiet recognition that walls could be torn down and rebuilt as doors. As midnight approached and guests began leaving, Victoria pulled Ethan aside one last time. "I have something for you," she said, handing him an envelope. "Don't open it now. Wait until tomorrow, Christmas morning. Share it with Jamie." After everyone had gone and Jamie was asleep, Ethan sat in his living room among the remnants of the party. Dishes to wash, furniture to straighten, evidence of life lived fully. He thought about opening Victoria's envelope, but decided to honor her request. Some things were worth waiting for. Christmas morning arrived with Jamie's enthusiasm and the ritual of opening presents. Small things mostly, toys and books and new soccer cleats, but each one chosen with care and given without the anxiety that had shadowed previous holidays. After the presents were opened and breakfast consumed, Ethan retrieved Victoria's envelope. Inside was a card with a handwritten note and a separate sealed document. The note read, "Ethan, this year you proved that talent never disappears. It only waits to be recognized. What you've built at Hale Industries matters, but what you represent matters more. In recognition of your contributions, the board has approved this bonus and promotion. You've earned every bit of it." Merry Christmas, Victoria. The sealed document was a contract amendment. Effective January 1st, Ethan would become Vice President of Advanced Innovation, with a salary increase that made his previous raise look modest, equity in the company that gave him literal ownership of the future he was helping build, and authority to expand his division to whatever size necessary to pursue transformative projects. He read it twice, making sure he understood correctly, then showed Jamie. "What does Vice President mean?" his son asked. "It means Dad gets to keep doing what he's doing, but with more responsibility and more ability to help people." "Will you still come to my soccer games?" "Always. That's non-negotiable." Jamie considered this, then nodded with satisfaction. "Then it's good. You should call Ms. Hale and say thank you." Ethan did, and Victoria answered on the first ring despite it being Christmas morning. "Did you open it?" "I did." "Victoria, this is too much. I haven't been with the company even a year. And in that year, you've delivered results that are reshaping our entire business model, started a program that's changing lives, and proven that investing in people generates returns that go beyond quarterly earnings. The board didn't approve this because I asked them to. They approved it because the evidence was undeniable." Her voice softened. "Take the win, Ethan. You've earned it. And use the position to do more of what you're already doing, finding potential where others see obstacles, building bridges instead of walls, proving that kindness and competence aren't opposing forces." After hanging up, Ethan sat with Jamie on the couch, looking at the contract that represented transformation made official. A year ago, he'd been counting pennies and juggling shifts and wondering how much longer he could keep running on empty. Now he was a vice president with equity and authority and a future that felt expansive rather than constrained. "Dad?" Jamie's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you happy?" "Yeah, buddy. I really am." "Good. You deserve to be happy. You're a good person who helps people." Jamie said this with absolute conviction, like it was a mathematical proof requiring no further evidence. And maybe he was right. Maybe the lesson of this entire year was that goodness mattered, that helping a stranger could create ripples that transformed everything, that walls built by circumstance could be torn down by people willing to see beyond them. Ethan thought about that night outside Murphy's bar, about the decision to intervene when walking away would have been easier. Thought about how he'd had no idea that single choice would lead here, to a warm house and a thriving son and a career that challenged and fulfilled him, to friendships that mattered and purpose that extended beyond survival. He thought about all the people still walking hallways at night, still driving ride shares, still working 3 jobs while talent waited unused, wondering if their chance would ever come. And he renewed his commitment to the talent recognition program, to finding those people and giving them what Victoria had given him. Not charity, but opportunity. Not pity, but recognition of worth that had always existed. Because that was the real transformation, the one that mattered most. Not the career success or the financial stability or even the professional recognition, though all of those were meaningful. The real transformation was understanding that worth wasn't contingent on circumstances, that potential didn't disappear just because life got hard, that sometimes the best thing you could do was help someone else tear down their walls while you were still figuring out how to dismantle your own. As spring approached and Ethan's division continued expanding, as the talent recognition program grew to include partnerships with universities and community organizations, as Jamie thrived in his new school and Ethan settled into leadership that felt natural rather than forced, he sometimes walked past Murphy's bar on his way to other destinations. The building looked the same neon sign, same heavy door, same windows showing the same kind of desperate escape from Friday night loneliness. But everything else had changed, and Ethan understood now that change wasn't about dramatic moments or singular decisions. It was about accumulated choices, about showing up every day and doing the work, about seeing people as they could be rather than as they currently were, about maintaining the belief that walls could become doors if you were willing to build the hinges. 1 year. That's all it had been since the night of no return, since exhaustion and principle had collided outside a bar and created a doorway neither he nor Victoria had known existed. 1 year, and his entire world had been rebuilt from survival mode into something that felt like genuine living. The walls were down now. The doors stood open. And Ethan Cole, who'd once believed his best days were behind him, was just beginning to understand how much future he actually had, how many lives he could touch, how much good could flow from a single decision to help someone who needed it. The talent had never disappeared. It had only been waiting. And now, finally, gratefully, inevitably, it was building something that would last far longer than quarterly earnings or annual reviews. It was building proof that second chances existed, that kindness compounded into transformation, that the person you helped today might become the person who changed everything tomorrow. That was the real story, not rags to riches, not hero's journey, but the simple truth that everyone deserves someone who gives a damn, that potential matters more than pedigree, and that sometimes the biggest risk is the one you don't take, the chance you don't give, the person you don't see, the door you don't build where everyone else only sees walls. Ethan had learned to build doors, and he was teaching others to do the same. That was enough. That was everything. That was the future he'd choose every single time, no matter how many walls stood in the way.